At his wedding, standing before 200 guests in a ballroom I paid for my son, took the microphone and looked me dead in the eye. He didn't thank me. He didn't speak of love. Instead, he announced with a smile that froze my blood, "I have always hated my last name. It smells of poverty and old dirt. Today, I am washing myself clean of it." Everyone laughed. They clapped as he publicly shamed our history. My son thought he was burying a legacy of shame, but he didn't know that the very name he was spitting on was sitting on a secret worth $15 million. That same week, the dirt he despised turned into a gold mine, and I was left with a choice: forgive the son who erased me, or let him drown in the shallow waters he chose for himself. Before I tell you how I made him regret every single syllable of that speech, let me know which city you are listening from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that a family name is something you honor, not something you sell. I am Wallace, 71 years old, and on the day my son got married, I realized I was not a father to him. I was just an ATM machine that had finally run out of cash. The wedding was held at the Moonlight Hotel in Chicago, a place with crystal chandeliers so big they looked like they could crush you. It smelled of expensive lilies and old money. But I was not sitting at the head table. I was not sitting with the family. I was seated at table 25, the very last table right next to the swinging doors of the kitchen. Every time a waiter walked out with a tray of filet mignon, the draft hit my neck. It was the table for distant cousins and forgotten acquaintances, yet there I was, the father of the groom, invisible in the corner. I looked down at my suit. It was a navy blue double-breasted suit I had bought in 1995. I had pressed it myself that morning in the hotel room, making sure the creases were sharp enough to cut paper. It was out of fashion, I knew that. The lapels were too wide and the fabric was a little shiny from years of wear. Around me, the guests, mostly Skylar's family and friends, wore tuxedos and designer silk dresses that cost more than my first car. I felt small. I felt like a stain on a pristine white tablecloth. I looked at the plate in front of me. It was foie gras, goose liver. I had paid $40,000 from my retirement savings for this wedding. $40,000. My mind drifted back to the steel mill. I could almost smell the sulfur in the burning metal. I remembered the double shifts I pulled when Trey was a boy. I remembered eating cold bologna sandwiches in the cab of my truck at 2 a.m, my hands stained black with grease that no soap could wash off, just so I could put extra money in the college fund. I did it so Trey would never have to touch a wrench. I did it so his hands could remain soft, so he could hold a pen and draw buildings. I looked at the goose liver again. It tasted like ash in my mouth. I took a sip of water, trying to swallow the lump in my throat. Across the room, I saw Eleanor Schuyler's mother. She was a tall woman with hair so stiff it didn't move when she turned her head. She caught my eye for a second. There was no warmth, no nod of acknowledgement. She looked at me the way one looks at a waiter who has dropped a fork. She looked through me, then turned back to laugh at something her wealthy sister said. I was not a person to them. I was a prop, a necessary inconvenience to make the wedding look legitimate. I was the dark shadow in their bright white fairy tale. Then the music stopped. The clinking of silverware died down. It was time for the speeches. My heart gave a little flutter. Despite the cold seat, despite the isolation, a foolish part of me still hoped. I hoped that maybe, just maybe, Trey would say it. Just a simple thank you. Just a nod to the old man in the cheap suit who made this possible. Trey stood up. He looked handsome. I gave him that. He looked like a prince in his custom-fitted tuxedo. Skylar sat next to him, her eyes gleaming like a predator that had just caught a rabbit. She squeezed his hand. It looked like support, but now I know it was a signal. Trey cleared his throat. The microphone whined for a second, then his voice filled the room. Smooth. Cultivated. He didn't sound like the boy I raised in Georgia. He sounded like them. He said, "Thank you all for coming to witness the beginning of our new life. Skylar and I have been talking a lot about the future, about legacy, about what it means to build a dynasty." The room was silent. I sat up straighter, smoothing my tie. He continued, "You know, for a long time, I felt held back. I felt like I was dragging a heavy chain behind me, a history that wasn't mine. A history of struggle, of dirt, of being at the bottom." My hands started to shake. I put them under the table. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the ceiling as if talking to God. He said, "The name Jefferson has served its purpose, I suppose. It is a name of laborers. of people who work with their backs because they cannot work with their minds. It is a name that belongs to the past. But Skylar and I, we are the future, and the future needs a brand that commands respect, a name that opens doors, not one that asks permission to enter. He paused for dramatic effect. Skylar looked at him with adoration. I felt the air leave my lungs. I knew what was coming, but I prayed I was wrong. I prayed to my late wife Esther that our son wouldn't do this. Trey smiled, a bright, white, camera-ready smile. So tonight I am making a declaration. I am not just taking a wife. I am taking a new identity. From this moment forward, I am no longer Trey Jefferson. I am dropping the weight. I am proud to take my wife's family name. Ladies and gentlemen, please raise your glasses to Mr. and Mrs. Trey Miller. The silence lasted for one heartbeat, and then the room exploded. Applause, cheering. People stood up. They were clapping. They were clapping for the death of my name. They were cheering because my son had decided that being a Jefferson was too shameful, too black, too working class for his high-rise life. Skylar kissed him a deep, theatrical kiss. I saw Eleanor wiping a tear from her eye, beaming with pride that her daughter had successfully civilized the savage. I sat there frozen. The clapping sounded like thunder, but to me it sounded like a slap. Over and over again. A slap in the face. A slap to my father who broke his back sharecropping. A slap to me who breathed in toxic fumes for 30 years. Jefferson was not a name of dirt. It was a name of survival. It was a name of dignity, and my son had just thrown it into the garbage for a round of applause from people who didn't give a damn about him. I looked at the glass of champagne in my hand. It was the expensive kind, $20 a glass. I watched the bubbles rise to the top and burst, just like my dreams for him. I didn't drink it. I couldn't. My stomach turned. I felt a wave of nausea so strong I thought I would be sick right there on table 25. I slowly placed the glass back on the table. My hand was shaking so bad that the stem hit the base of the plate with a loud clink. A woman at the next table, a second cousin of the bride with too much makeup, glanced at me and shushed me. She wanted to hear Trey's closing remarks. She didn't want the noise of the old man disturbing the show. I stood up. My knees popped. I felt every year of my 71 years. Trey was still talking, making jokes about how hard it is to spell Jefferson anyway. More laughter. I buttoned my jacket. I didn't look for my coat. I didn't say goodbye to the people at my table. I turned my back to the stage. I turned my back to the head table. I walked toward the double doors. The walk felt like it took a lifetime. The carpet was thick, muffling my footsteps. I was a ghost leaving a feast I had paid for. As I pushed the heavy doors open, I looked back one last time, just once. I wanted to see if he was looking for me. I wanted to see if there was a flicker of regret in his eyes. But there was nothing. Trey was raising his glass to Skylar's father, a man who had never given him a dime, laughing at a joke I couldn't hear. I walked out into the cool Chicago night. The valet asked for my ticket. I told him I didn't have a car. I had taken a taxi so I could drink a toast to my son. I walked down the street, the cold wind biting through my thin suit. I didn't feel the cold. I felt a fire burning in my chest. It wasn't sadness anymore. Sadness is for things you can fix. This was something else. This was the finality of a door slamming shut. I took my phone out of my pocket. I had a picture of Trey as a boy on my lock screen. He was sitting on my shoulders, wearing a little baseball cap, smiling with missing teeth. I looked at it for a long minute under the street lamp. Then I unlocked the phone and changed the background to a plain black screen. I hailed a cab. The driver asked me where to. I gave him the address of my hotel. He asked if I had a good time at the party. I looked him in the rearview mirror and said the party is over, but the work is just beginning. I didn't know it then, sitting in the back of that smelling taxi, but the universe has a strange sense of humor. While my son was busy washing his hands of my name, a lawyer in Atlanta was trying to call me. He had news about a piece of land I had bought 40 years ago. A piece of land everyone called a junkyard. A piece of land that was about to make the name Jefferson worth more than everyone in that ballroom combined. Trey wanted to be a Miller because he thought it meant money. He was about to find out that he had just walked away from the winning lottery ticket, and I was going to make sure he couldn't buy his way back in. The morning sun hit the peeling white paint of my front porch, but it brought no warmth to the house. I was sitting in my armchair, the same leather chair I had bought 30 years ago when I got my promotion to foreman at the mill. It was cracked and worn in the shape of my body. My head was still throbbing from the champagne I didn't drink and the tears I didn't shed the night before. I heard the crunch of gravel in the driveway. I didn't need to look out the window to know who it was. The engine purred too quietly to be anyone from this neighborhood. It was the sound of money. It was the sound of a silver Mercedes pulling up next to my rusted Ford truck. The front door opened without a knock. Trey walked in first, wearing a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my monthly heating bill. Skylar followed him wearing sunglasses even though it was dim inside. She took one step onto the carpet and stopped. Her nose wrinkled. She lifted a hand to cover her face, waving the air in front of her as if she had just walked into a sewage plant. "It smells like old grease in here," she said, her voice muffled behind her hand. "It smells like old people in stagnation." I watched them from my chair. They didn't move further into the room. They stood near the door, hovering like health inspectors afraid of contamination. I pointed to the sofa, the one with the floral pattern that Esther had loved so much. "Sit down," I said. My voice was raspy. Trey looked at the sofa. He looked at the slightly frayed armrest and the dust motes dancing in the beam of sunlight. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "We are fine standing," he said. "We cannot stay long. We have a brunch reservation in the city, and we cannot risk getting dust on these clothes." I gripped the armrests of my chair. They wouldn't even sit. My own son wouldn't sit in the house that raised him because he was afraid of the dust, the house that protected him from the cold, the house where he learned to walk. Now it was just a dirty box to him. Skylar was still fanning the air. "You really need to hire a professional cleaner, Wallace," she said. "Or better yet, just burn some sage. The smell of engine oil is seeping into the drywall. It is really quite oppressive." Trey cleared his throat, signaling that the small talk was over. He was holding a manila envelope. He held it tightly, his knuckles white like it contained a bomb or a winning lottery ticket. I knew it wasn't a lottery ticket. He walked over to the small coffee table between us, taking care not to let his trousers touch the edge, and placed the envelope down. It slid across the wood and stopped in front of me. "What is this?" I asked, though I already felt the cold weight of it in my stomach. "It is just some paperwork," Trey said, avoiding my eyes. He looked at a water stain on the ceiling instead. After the announcement last night, Skylar and I realized we needed to make things official, legal. We want to make sure there is no confusion moving forward. I reached for the envelope. My hands were rough-scarred from years of handling hot steel. The paper felt smooth and expensive against my calluses. I pulled out the documents. The first page was a petition for a legal name change. The second page was something else. A non-disclosure agreement. A restraining order of sorts, but dressed up in fancy legal language. I read the words. Petition to change the name of Wallace Trey Jefferson III to Trey Miller. And below that, a clause stating that the biological father, Wallace Jefferson, agrees to refrain from publicly claiming any familial relationship that could damage the reputation or social standing of the petitioners. I looked up at him. The air in the room felt heavy, suffocating. "You want me to sign a contract promising I won't tell people you are my son?" I asked. Trey finally looked at me. His eyes were hard, cold. "It is not like that, Dad," he said, but the word dad sounded like an insult coming from his mouth. "It is about branding. You have to understand the world I operate in. I am an architect. I am trying to win contracts with major firms. I am trying to build a legacy." "And the name Jefferson stops you from doing that?" I asked. My voice was rising, trembling with a mix of rage and sorrow. "Yes," Trey snapped. "Yes, it does. Let us be honest. The name Jefferson sounds like a servant. It sounds like a laborer. It sounds like someone who fixes the sink, not someone who designs the building. When people hear Jefferson, they think of the projects. They think of poverty. They think of slavery." He took a breath and stepped closer. His face twisted in a sneer I had never seen before. "I need a name that sounds clean, a name that sounds white, a name that sounds like it belongs on a plaque in a boardroom. Miller is that name. It is neutral. It is powerful. It opens doors that Jefferson keeps locked." I stood up then. My knees cracked, but I stood tall. I walked over to the mantelpiece where a black and white photo of my father sat. He was wearing his army uniform. "Listen to me, boy," I said, pointing a shaking finger at the photo. "Your grandfather carried that name into war. He came back and plowed fields until his hands bled so you could have soft hands. That name survived cotton fields. It survived segregation. It survived things you cannot even imagine in your fancy high-rise apartment. That name is not dirt. It is iron. Skylar let out a sharp, dry laugh. It sounded like glass breaking. "Oh, please, Wallace," she said, rolling her eyes. She checked her diamond watch, looking bored. "Spare us the history lesson. We have heard the story about the noble struggle 1,000 times. It is exhausting. You are living in the past." She walked up to Trey and placed a hand on his shoulder, looking at me with pure disdain. "Look around you, Wallace. Look at this house. Look at your furniture. That is what the name Jefferson has bought you. Nothing. Absolutely nothing but dust and memories. History does not pay the bills, Wallace. History does not get you a membership at the country club. We are offering you a chance to let Trey fly. Don't be the anchor that drags him down to the bottom of the ocean with you." I looked at her. Then I looked at Trey. He didn't defend me. He didn't tell her to stop. He just nodded, agreeing with her. He was ashamed of me. He was ashamed of the sweat and the blood that paid for his college degree. He looked at me not as a father, but as a stain he was trying to scrub out of his life. In that moment, something inside me broke, but it wasn't my heart. It was the chain that bound me to him. I looked at the man standing in my living room, and I realized I didn't know him. The boy I had taught to ride a bike was gone. The young man I had dropped off at university was gone. This person in front of me was a stranger who hated himself so much he wanted to erase his own existence. I looked down at the papers again. "Fine," I said. My voice was eerily calm. Trey's face lit up. "Really?" he asked. "You will sign." I walked to the drawer and pulled out a pen. It was a cheap plastic pen I got from the bank. I walked back to the table. I didn't sit down. I leaned over the paper. I felt the anger channeling down my arm into my hand, into the tip of the pen. I put the pen to the paper. I didn't just write. I carved. I pressed down so hard that the tip of the pen tore through the first page, ripping the paper as I slashed my signature across the line. The sound of the paper tearing was loud in the quiet room. I signed Wallace Jefferson. The letters were jagged and ugly and fierce. I threw the pen against the wall. It bounced off with a hollow clatter. I shoved the papers toward him. "There," I said. "You have what you wanted. You are a Miller now." Trey picked up the papers, checking to make sure the signature was legible despite the tear. He smiled a relieved, selfish smile. "Thanks, Dad," he said. "You are doing the right thing." I raised my hand and pointed to the door. "Stop," I said. "Don't call me that." Trey froze. "What? You wanted to kill the name Jefferson?" I said, stepping closer to him until I could smell his expensive cologne. "Well, you succeeded. Jefferson is dead to you, and that means the man who carries that name is dead to you too. I am not your father anymore. I am just a man named Wallace Jefferson, and this is my house." Skylar scoffed. "You are being dramatic. Come on, Trey, we are going to be late." I walked to the door and threw it open. The sunlight blinded me for a second, but I didn't blink. "Get out," I roared. My voice shook the walls. "Get out of my house. Take your new name and your clean clothes and get the hell out of my sight. And take this with you." I grabbed the framed photo of Trey's graduation from the mantelpiece, the one where he was wearing his gown, smiling next to me. I shoved it into his chest. He stumbled back, clutching the frame. He looked at me shocked. He had expected me to be sad. He had expected me to beg. He hadn't expected me to fight back. "I don't want strangers on my mantle," I said. Trey looked at the photo, then at me. For a second, just a split second, I saw fear in his eyes. But Skylar pulled his arm. "Let's go, Trey," she hissed. "He is crazy. Let him rot in this dump." They walked out. They walked fast, almost running to the safety of their silver car. I watched them go. I watched them get in, slam the doors, and speed away, gravel flying from their tires. I stood in the doorway until the car disappeared around the bend. The silence rushed back into the house. It was quiet. It was lonely. But the air felt cleaner. The smell of their expensive perfume was fading, leaving only the smell of old wood and hard work. I looked at my hands. They were shaking. I closed the door and locked it. I slid the deadbolt into place. It was done. My son was gone. I walked back to my chair and sat down. I picked up the pen from the floor. I held it for a long time. I thought I would cry. I waited for the tears. but they didn't come. Instead, I felt a strange, cold clarity. They thought they had buried me. They thought they had left an old man to die in the past. But they had forgotten one thing. You can't bury a seed and expect it to rot. Sometimes, when you bury something in the dirt, it grows. And I was about to grow into something they could never imagine. For the next 48 hours, I did not leave my bed. The curtains were drawn tight against the world, but the darkness inside the room was nothing compared to the darkness inside my chest. I lay there staring at the water stains on the ceiling tiles, counting the cracks in the plaster just to keep my mind from shattering completely. I was 71 years old, and for the first time in my life I felt completely and utterly useless. I looked at the empty side of the bed where Esther used to sleep. Her pillow was still there, untouched for 5 years, but I could not feel her presence anymore. Usually I would talk to her in the quiet moments of the morning. I would tell her about the garden or the news or how our son was doing. But today I had nothing to say. I could not tell her that the boy we raised, the boy we starved for, had thrown our name into the dirt like a used wrapper. I felt like I had failed her. I felt like the legacy of hard work and dignity we tried to build was nothing more than a joke. I was a black man born in a time when I had to step off the sidewalk to let a white man pass. I had spent 50 years working in a steel mill, breathing in soot and swallowing my pride so my son could walk with his head high. I thought I was building a foundation. I thought I was planting a tree that would shade my grandchildren. But lying in that bed, smelling the stale air of a house that suddenly felt too big and too empty, I realized I was just an old fool. Society had always told men like me that we were invisible, that we did not matter. But I never believed it until my own son looked me in the eye and confirmed it. He was ashamed of me. He was ashamed of the grease under my fingernails and the calluses on my palms. He wanted to be a Miller because Miller sounded clean. Jefferson sounded like sweat. I stopped eating. I stopped drinking. I just lay there and waited for the grief to kill me. I thought about just letting go. Maybe it would be easier to just close my eyes and drift away to wherever Esther was. At least there I would not have to feel the phantom pain of a knife in my back. The silence in the house was heavy. It pressed down on my chest like a physical weight. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, marking the seconds of a life that no longer had a purpose. Then the phone rang. It was a sharp, jarring sound that cut through the gloom. I ignored it. I let it ring until the machine picked up. Then it rang again, and again. It was persistent, angry almost. I turned over and pulled the blanket over my head. I did not want to talk to anyone. I did not want to hear pity from neighbors who had heard the gossip. I did not want to hear Trey's voice explaining why he did what he did. But the ringing did not stop. It went on for an hour. Finally, driven by a spark of irritation that cut through my depression, I reached out a trembling hand and picked up the receiver. "Hello?" I croaked. My voice sounded like rusty hinges. "Mr. Jefferson, it is Arthur Banks." I let out a breath. Banks was my lawyer, a good man, a quiet man. He handled my small will and the deed to the house. "I am not in the mood, Arthur," I said. "If this is about the updated will, just shred it. I have no one to leave anything to anymore." "Do not hang up," Wallace the lawyer said. His voice was different today. Usually he spoke slow and calm. Today he spoke fast. His voice was vibrating with something I could not place. "I need you to listen to me very carefully. Are you sitting down?" "I am lying down," I said. "Good. You need to be." "Wallace, do you remember the 50 acres of land you bought out past the highway in 1982? The plot near the old textile factory?" I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. I remembered it well. I remembered the day I signed the deed. My friends at the mill had laughed at me. They called it Wallace's Swamp. It was a stretch of rocky, uneven ground next to a defunct factory that had dumped chemicals into the soil for decades. It was ugly land, useless land, but it was cheap. It was dirt cheap. And back then, it was the only piece of earth a black man with a factory wage could buy without a bank loan. I bought it because I wanted to own something, anything. I wanted to be able to stand on a piece of dirt and say, "This is mine. No one can tell me to move." "I remember it," I said. "What about it? Did the city find me for the weeds again?" "No, Wallace. Listen to me. The city is expanding. The tech boom is moving south. You know that new highway they finished last year? It runs right past your property line. So what? I asked. I was tired. I wanted to go back to sleep. So Amazon has been scouting locations for a new regional data center, Arthur said. They need a massive plot of land. They need it close to the power grid and close to the fiber optic lines that run under the highway. Your land is not a swamp anymore, Wallace. It is the only plot of land in the entire county that fits their specifications. I sat up. The blood rushed from my head. I gripped the phone tighter. What are you saying, Arthur? I am saying they contacted me this morning. They have been trying to find the owner for weeks. They made an offer. Wallace, an opening offer. I stayed silent. I looked at the dust motes dancing in the sliver of light coming through the curtains. $15 million, Arthur said. The world stopped spinning. The silence in the room suddenly felt loud. I thought I had misheard him. I thought maybe the grief had finally snapped my mind and I was hallucinating. 15,000, I asked. Million, Wallace. $15 million. And it is a cash deal. They want to break ground next month. They are not asking for a mortgage. They are writing a check. I sat on the edge of the bed. My feet touched the cold wood floor. $15 million. I tried to visualize that much money. I couldn't. It was just a number. It was an abstraction. But then the reality of it hit me like a physical blow. The land that everyone called junk. The land that Trey had called a waste of money when he was a teenager. He used to beg me to sell it so I could buy him a better car. He called it the dirt patch. I started to laugh. But it wasn't a happy laugh. It was a low rumble that started in my belly and worked its way up until my shoulders were shaking. It was the laughter of a man who sees the biggest cosmic joke in the universe. My son had just changed his name because he thought Jefferson meant poverty. He had thrown away his identity because he thought I was nothing but a dead end. And 3 days later, the very dirt he was ashamed of had turned into a mountain of gold. I will be at your office in an hour, I said. I hung up the phone. I sat there for a minute longer. The depression that had pinned me to the mattress was gone. In its place was something colder, something harder. I stood up and walked to the mirror. I looked at the old man staring back at me. I saw the gray stubble on my chin. I saw the red-rimmed eyes. But behind the eyes, the fire was back. I walked to the bathroom and turned on the hot water. I shaved off the stubble. I splashed cold water on my face. I opened the closet and pushed aside the old work clothes. I reached into the back and pulled out my best Sunday suit. It was black, crisp. I put it on. I tied my tie with steady hands. I looked like a man going to a funeral or a man going to war. I drove my rusted truck to downtown Atlanta. The engine sputtered and coughed, but I didn't care. Soon I could buy a fleet of trucks if I wanted, but I wouldn't. I parked in front of Arthur's building and walked past the receptionist who looked at my worn shoes with skepticism. When I walked into Arthur's office, the contract was sitting on his mahogany desk. It was thick. The cover page had the Amazon logo on it, and there in bold print was the number, $15 million. Arthur was smiling. He poured me a glass of water. "Congratulations, Wallace," he said. "You are a rich man. This changes everything. You can travel. You can buy a mansion. You can help Trey." I flinched at the name. Arthur saw it. He stopped smiling. "I heard about the wedding," Wallace Arthur said softly. "I am sorry." I picked up the pen. I looked at the contract. I thought about Trey's face when he handed me the name change papers. I thought about Skylar covering her nose in my house. I thought about them driving away in their leased Mercedes, terrified of my poverty. They wanted to be Millers because they thought Millers were better than Jeffersons. They wanted a clean slate. I looked at Arthur. My face was stone. "I am not going to help Trey," I said. Arthur looked confused. "But Wallace, he is your son. This is generational wealth. This is what you worked for." "No," I said. "I worked for a son named Jefferson. That son is dead. The man who lives in his house is a stranger named Miller, and strangers do not inherit my blood and sweat." I signed the contract. The ink flowed smoothly. I felt a surge of power I had not felt in years. For the first time in my life, I held the cards. I held all the cards. "What are you going to do?" Arthur asked. I stood up and buttoned my jacket. I looked out the window at the city skyline. I saw the cranes building skyscrapers. I saw the world moving forward. I am going to teach him a lesson, I said. A lesson about value. He thinks value comes from a label. He thinks value comes from pretending to be something you are not. I am going to show him that you can change the label on a bottle of poison, but it is still poison. And you can change the label on a jar of gold, but it is still gold. I turned to Arthur. Do not tell anyone about this deal. Not yet. I want the money deposited in a trust, and I want full control. Arthur nodded slowly. He saw the look in my eyes. It wasn't the look of a lottery winner. It was the look of a judge delivering a sentence. You have a plan, don't you? Arthur asked. I walked to the door. I put my hand on the knob. Yes, I said. He wanted to erase me. He wanted to bury the past. Well, he is about to find out that when you bury things, sometimes they have a habit of coming back to haunt you. He wants to play the game of high society. Fine. I am going to buy the whole damn game board, and then I am going to foreclose on him. I walked out of the office. The sun was shining on the street, but inside me, it was winter. I had $15 million in my pocket and a hole in my heart where my son used to be. I was going to fill that hole with justice. Cold, hard justice. I got into my truck and started the engine. It was time to go hunting. While I was sitting in my dark kitchen nursing a glass of whiskey and staring at the rain against the window across town in a glass-walled office on the 25th floor, the first domino of my revenge was falling. Skylar was working late. She was always working late. Not because she was hard-working, but because she was hungry. She was a junior partner at a commercial real estate firm, and she spent her nights scouring the database for undervalued properties she could snatch up and flip for a profit. She had a nose for money. It was the only talent she actually possessed. The city was battered by a storm that night. Thunder rattled the windows of her office, but Skylar didn't look up. Her eyes were glued to her dual monitors. A notification popped up on the internal server. It was a done deal alert, a massive acquisition by a shell company linked to Amazon. They had just closed a cash purchase for 50 acres of industrial wasteland in the southern sector. The price tag was $15 million. Skylar leaned in. She knew that area. Everyone in real estate knew that area. It was the dead zone, the place where old factories went to die. She clicked on the property details, her manicured finger tapping the mouse with impatience. The owner was listed as a blind trust, but the previous owner was listed simply as WJ, followed by an address. Skylar froze. She knew that address. She had been there just 24 hours ago. She had stood on the porch of that address and held a handkerchief to her nose because she thought it smelled like poverty. She blinked, thinking it was a mistake. She pulled up the county tax records. There was no mistake. The 50 acres of scrapland, the land she had mocked Trey's father for keeping the land she called a burden, had just been sold for a fortune. I can only imagine the sound she made. It must have been a sound of pure animalistic agony. She grabbed her phone, her hands shaking so hard she nearly dropped it. She dialed Trey. He was probably at a bar celebrating his new name and his new freedom. When he answered, she didn't say hello. She screamed, "You idiot. You absolute colossal idiot." Trey, confused and slightly drunk, asked her what was wrong. "Your father," Skylar shrieked, her voice cracking. "The old man, the one we just disowned, the one we just spit on, he just sold the dirt patch." Trey laughed nervously. "So what, Skylar?" "It is worth what? 10 grand. $15 million, Trey. 15 million. Cash. Amazon bought it." There was silence on the other end of the line. A silence so deep it felt like the phone had died. Then a choke. A sound of someone who had just been punched in the gut. Skylar did not give him time to breathe. "Get the car. Pick me up now. We are going back." "But we just signed the papers," Trey stammered. "We just told him to rot." "I do not care what we said," Skylar hissed. "Tear up the papers. Burn them. I don't care if you have to crawl on your knees and lick his boots. That old man is sitting on a winning lottery ticket, and we are the only family he has. If you want a future, if you want to keep living in this city, you will get in the car, and you will fix this." 30 minutes later, a silver Mercedes was tearing down the highway, hydroplaning on the wet asphalt. Inside, the air was thick with panic and greed. Trey was driving, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Skylar was in the passenger seat, checking her makeup in the visor mirror, frantically trying to wipe away the look of a predator and replace it with the look of a concerned daughter. They began to rehearse their lies. It was a sickening performance practiced in the privacy of their leather seats. He does not know that we know, Trey said, his voice trembling. He thinks we are just coming back to apologize. Exactly, Skylar said, applying a fresh coat of modest pink lipstick. We play the family card. We tell him we were stressed. We tell him the wedding pressure got to us. We tell him we love him. He is old Trey. He is lonely. Old people are desperate for connection. He will believe us because he wants to believe us. But what about the name change, Trey asked. Forget the name, Skylar snapped. Tell him you made a mistake. Tell him you tore up the application. Tell him you realized that Jefferson is a noble name. Tell him whatever he wants to hear. Just get us in the house. Once we are in, we take control. We get power of attorney. We tell him he is too old to manage that kind of money. We do it for his own good. Trey nodded, swallowing hard. For his own good. They convinced themselves. By the time they reached my exit, they had rewritten history. They weren't vultures circling a carcass. No, in their minds, they were the responsible children coming to save their senile father from the burden of wealth. They were the heroes of their own twisted story. I was waiting for them. I knew they would come. You do not throw a piece of meat in the water and expect the sharks to ignore it. I had seen the headlights cut through the rain from a mile away. I sat in my armchair, the same chair they had refused to sit in yesterday. I didn't turn on the porch light. I wanted them to walk in the rain. I heard the car door slam, then the frantic footsteps running up the walkway. They didn't knock politely this time. They banged on the door, a desperate rhythmic pounding. Dad! Dad, are you in there? Open up, please. I let them wait. I took a slow sip of my drink. I checked my watch. 1 minute, 2 minutes. Let them get wet. Let the cold seep into their bones. Finally, I stood up. I stood. I walked to the door and unlocked the deadbolt. I opened it slowly. They stood there soaked to the bone. Skylar's expensive hair was plastered to her skull. Trey's cashmere sweater was ruined. They looked pathetic. They looked small. Trey didn't wait for an invitation. He lunged at me. He threw his arms around me in a hug that was so tight it hurt. He buried his face in my shoulder. I could smell the rain on him, but underneath that I smelled the stale alcohol and the sharp metallic scent of fear. Dad, I am so sorry, he sobbed. His body shook. It was a masterful performance. If I didn't know better, if I hadn't seen him sign that paper with a smile on his face, I might have believed him. I stood there like a statue. I didn't hug him back. My arms hung by my sides. I stared over his shoulder at Skylar. She was standing in the doorway, shivering, her hands clasped together in a plea. She looked at me with big, wet eyes. We made a terrible mistake, Wallace, she said, her voice trembling perfectly. We were so wrong. We let the stress of the wedding turn us into people we are not. Please, can you forgive us? Trey pulled back, keeping his hands on my shoulders. He looked me in the eyes. Tears were streaming down his face, real tears. But they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of a man who was terrified of being poor. I tore up the papers, Dad, Trey said. I didn't file them. I couldn't do it. I realized on the drive home that I can't be a Miller. I am a Jefferson. I am your son. He was lying. I knew for a fact the papers had been filed electronically that morning. My lawyer had already received the notification. But I didn't say anything. Not yet. I looked at them. I looked at the hunger hidden deep behind their pupils. They thought I was a senile old man. They thought I was a soft touch. They thought they could walk in here, shed a few tears, and walk out with the keys to the kingdom. I stepped back and gestured into the room. Come in, I said softly. You are getting the floor wet. Relief washed over their faces. It was almost comical. They thought they had won. They thought the door was open. They didn't realize that they weren't walking into a home. They were walking into a cage, and I was the one holding the lock. Come in, I repeated. We have a lot to talk about. Trey wiped his eyes and smiled a weak, grateful smile. Thank you, Dad. You won't regret this. Oh, I knew I wouldn't regret it. But as I watched them walk past me, stepping gingerly onto the carpet they had despised yesterday, I knew with absolute certainty that they would regret it. They would regret this night for the rest of their lives. I closed the door and locked it. The click of the deadbolt sounded like the closing of a coffin lid. The trap was set. Now it was time to play with my food. The kitchen had not smelled like roast chicken and rosemary since the day Esther died 5 years ago. My house was usually filled with the scent of old paper and black coffee, but tonight it smelled like a lie. I sat at the small wooden table in the corner watching a performance that would have won an award on Broadway. Skylar was standing at my stove. Skylar, the woman who once told me she was allergic to dish soap and who ordered takeout for every meal I had ever seen her eat. She was wearing one of Esther's old floral aprons tied tightly around her waist over her silk blouse. The sight of it made my stomach churn. That apron was sacred ground, and she was wearing it like a costume. She moved around the kitchen with a frantic manic energy, chopping vegetables with a knife that was too big for her hand. She was humming a tune. It was a happy tune. It was the sound of a woman who thought she had just won the lottery. I sat there with my hands folded on the table, trying to keep them from shaking, not from age, but from a rage so hot it felt like heartburn. Trey was sitting across from me. He had taken off his wet jacket and rolled up the sleeves of his shirt. He was pouring wine into 3 glasses he had found in the back of the cupboard. Glasses that were covered in dust an hour ago but were now sparkling clean. "Here you go, Dad," Trey said, placing a glass in front of me. "Drink up. It is good for your heart." I looked at the wine. It was red like blood. I didn't touch it. Skylar turned around from the stove, wiping her hands on the apron. "Wallace, you look so pale," she said. Her voice was dripping with a sweetness that tasted like saccharin. "I have been worried about you all day. You know stress can be a silent killer for men your age." "I am fine," I said. My voice was low. "Are you sure?" she asked, walking over to me. She placed the back of her hand against my forehead. Her skin was cold. It felt like a lizard touching me. "You feel a little clammy. And I noticed your hands were trembling earlier when you opened the door." I pulled my head back away from her touch. "I was just cold, Skylar. It is raining." "No, it is more than that," she said, shaking her head with a look of deep concern. "I think you are having episodes, Wallace. Yesterday at the wedding you were acting so erratic. And today, with the signing of those papers, I mean really signing a name change document and then tearing it up in your mind, that is a sign of confusion." I stared at her. She was rewriting reality right in front of my face. She was trying to convince me that the pen I drove through the paper never happened. She was trying to tell me that my memory was a broken mirror. "I remember exactly what happened," I said. "Do you?" Trey asked, leaning in. "Dad, you were shouting. You were talking about things that didn't make sense. You were talking about Grandpa and the war. You were agitated. We think maybe you are in the early stages of something, maybe dementia. There it was, the seed they were planting. If they could convince me I was crazy, they could control me. If they could convince a judge I was crazy, they could control the money." Skylar reached into her purse and pulled out a blood pressure cuff. I have no idea why she had it in her bag, but seeing it there made me realize this wasn't an impulsive visit. This was a calculated raid. "Let me just check your numbers," she said, unvelcroing the cuff. It made a ripping sound in the quiet kitchen. I sat still and let her wrap the gray band around my arm. She pumped the bulb. I felt the pressure tighten around my bicep, squeezing the flow of blood. It felt like a python constricting its prey. She watched the dial with narrow eyes. "High," she whispered. "Very high. You are a ticking time bomb, Wallace. You need rest. You need to not worry about anything, especially not complicated things like business or land deals." She ripped the Velcro off and turned back to the stove. "Dinner is ready," she announced. She placed a platter of roasted chicken and vegetables in the center of the table. It looked perfect, too perfect. She served me a large portion, piling potatoes onto my plate. "Eat up," she said. "You need your strength." We ate in silence for a few minutes. The only sound was the scraping of silverware on china. The chicken was dry, but I forced myself to chew and swallow. I needed to keep up the charade. I needed them to think I was just a tired old man grateful for a hot meal. "So Dad," Trey said, wiping his mouth with a napkin. "We need to talk about the elephant in the room. The land." I kept my eyes on my plate. "What about it?" $15 million is a lot of money," Trey said. His voice dropped to a whisper as if saying the number too loud would make it disappear. "It is a dangerous amount of money for anyone, but especially for someone in your position." "My position?" I asked, looking up. "You know what I mean," Skylar interrupted. "You have lived a simple life, Wallace. You are used to pension checks and coupons. Suddenly having that kind of liquidity is overwhelming. It makes you a target." "A target for who?" I asked. "Scammers," Trey said quickly. "Con artists. people who prey on the elderly. They will come out of the woodwork, Dad. They will call you with fake investment schemes. They will try to get you to sign things you do not understand. You could lose it all in a month if you are not careful. I took a sip of water to hide the smile that wanted to creep onto my face. The only con artists in my life were sitting right at my dinner table eating my food. So what do you suggest? I asked, playing the part of the confused victim. Trey reached down and picked up a leather briefcase he had brought in from the car. He placed it on the table, pushing the chicken platter aside. He opened it and pulled out a stack of colorful charts and graphs. "Skylar and I have been talking," he said. "Since Skylar works in finance and real estate, she knows how to handle this kind of wealth. We have drawn up a preliminary protection plan for you." Skylar stood up and walked around the table, standing behind me. She pointed a manicured finger at a pie chart that was mostly colored blue. "See this, Wallace," she said. "This is a diversified blind trust. We move the $15 million into an account that is shielded from tax liabilities and public scrutiny. It is the safest way to protect the principal." "And who controls the trust?" I asked. "Well, you do, technically," Skylar said. "But since the legal jargon is so dense and the daily management requires a professional touch, Trey and I would be listed as the primary trustees. We would have power of attorney to make investment decisions on your behalf. We would give you a generous monthly allowance, of course, enough to buy whatever you want, a new truck, a boat, anything." I looked at the chart. It meant nothing. It was just colors on a page designed to dazzle a man they thought was simple. "So I give you the money, and you give me an allowance?" I asked, slowly testing the words. "No, Dad," Trey said, looking hurt. "You are not giving us the money. We are protecting it for you. We are family. Who else can you trust if not your own son?" I looked at him. My son. The man who yesterday wanted to be a miller. Now he was using the bond of blood he had tried to sever to bind me to a contract that would leave me penniless. I picked up the document they had placed on top of the charts. It was a power of attorney form. It gave them full access to my bank accounts, my assets, and my medical decisions. If I signed this, they could put me in a home next week, and I would not be able to buy a pack of gum without their permission. My hand started to tremble. I let the shaking travel from my fingers up to my wrist. I let the paper rattle in my hand. I dropped the paper. It fluttered to the floor. I reached for my fork and let my hand spasm again. The fork clattered onto the plate, making a loud noise that made Skylar jump. "I am sorry," I whispered, my voice shaking. I am so tired. My head is spinning, all these numbers, all these colors, I cannot think straight." Trey looked at Skylar. I saw the look that passed between them. It was a look of excitement. They saw the weakness. They saw the prey faltering. "It is okay, Dad," Trey said soothingly. "You do not have to think. That is why we are here. We can do the thinking for you. Just sign the bottom line and we will handle everything. You can go to sleep and wake up a rich man with no worries." He held out a pen, a gold pen, not the cheap plastic one I had used yesterday. I reached for the pen. My hand hovered over it. Then I pulled back. "I cannot," I said. "Not tonight." "Why not?" Skylar asked sharply, her mask of kindness slipping for a fraction of a second. "I need to pray on it," I said. Esther always told me never to sign anything big without praying on it. And my eyes are blurry. The letters are swimming on the page. I might sign the wrong line. I rubbed my eyes, feigning exhaustion. "Leave the papers here," I said. "I will sleep. I will pray. Come back tomorrow morning. We can go to the bank together." Trey looked at Skylar. She bit her lip. She wanted to force the pen into my hand. I could see the greed vibrating in her neck muscles, but she knew that if she pushed too hard, I might snap back. She needed to keep the illusion of care alive. "Okay," she said, letting out a breath she had been holding. "Okay, Wallace, that is sensible. You rest. We will come back at 9 sharp tomorrow morning, and we will drive you to the bank." "Yes," I said. 9 tomorrow. Trey stood up and closed the briefcase, but he left the papers on the table. He wanted them staring at me all night. "We love you, Dad," Trey said, kissing me on the top of my head. It felt like a betrayal. "We are just doing this because we love you." "I know," I whispered. They cleaned up the kitchen, quickly putting the dishes in the sink. They were eager to leave. They wanted to go somewhere and celebrate. They probably had a bottle of champagne chilling in their fridge, waiting to toast to their new fortune. I walked them to the door. The rain had stopped, but the air was still heavy. "Get some sleep," Wallace Skylar said. "You look like you have one foot in the grave." She didn't mean it as a joke. I watched them get into the silver Mercedes. I watched them drive away. I stood on the porch until their taillights disappeared. Then I went back inside. I locked the door. I walked to the kitchen table. I stopped shaking. My hands were as steady as a surgeon's. I picked up the power of attorney form. I read it carefully. Every clause was a trap. Every sentence was a chain. I looked at the pie chart. I laughed. A cold, hard laugh that echoed in the empty house. They thought I was weak. They thought I was confused. They thought the game was over. I walked to the stove and turned on the gas burner. The blue flame flickered to life. I held the corner of the pie chart to the flame. The paper caught fire instantly. I watched the blue section turn to black ash. I dropped it into the sink and watched it burn. "Come back at 9 tomorrow," I said to the empty room. "Come back and see what the old man has prepared for you." I picked up the phone and dialed a number I had memorized earlier that day. "Hello," a voice answered. It was gravelly and low. "Mr. Vance," I said, "this is Wallace Jefferson." "Mr. Jefferson, I have the report you asked for. Bring it over," I said. "Tonight. And bring your camera. I have a feeling tomorrow is going to be a very interesting day." I hung up the phone. I wasn't going to sleep. I wasn't going to pray. I was going to war. And unlike my son, I didn't need a fake name to win. I just needed the truth. And the truth was about to hit them like a freight train. I did not sleep that night. Instead of praying like I told my son I would, I put on my raincoat and slipped out the back door. The rain had turned into a steady, depressing drizzle that soaked into the bones. I drove my truck to a 24-hour diner on the edge of town, the kind of place where truck drivers and insomniacs go to hide from their ghosts. The neon sign buzzed overhead, casting a sickly yellow light onto the wet pavement. I sat in a booth at the back, nursing a cup of black coffee that tasted like burnt rubber. I wasn't there for the food. I was there for the truth. 10 minutes later, the bell above the door jingled. A man walked in. He was wearing a trench coat that had seen better days and a hat pulled low over his eyes. It was Vance. He was a retired police detective who had spent 30 years working the Vice Squad. He knew where all the bodies were buried in this city, and more importantly, he knew how to dig them up. I had hired him the day after the wedding, just a few hours before Amazon called me. It was the best investment I had ever made. Vance slid into the booth opposite me. He didn't say hello. He didn't order anything. He just reached into his coat and pulled out a thick manila envelope. It hit the table with a heavy thud. The sound echoed in the empty diner like a judge's gavel. "You are not going to like this," Wallace Vance said. His voice was rough like gravel grinding against concrete. "I have seen some messy lives in my time, but your boy and his wife, they are not just living on the edge. They have already fallen off the cliff. They are just waiting for the ground to hit them." I looked at the envelope. It looked innocent enough. Just paper. But I knew it contained the autopsy of my son's integrity. My hand hovered over it. A part of me, the father part, wanted to push it away. I wanted to stand up, walk out, and go back to the fantasy that my son was just a little misguided. I wanted to believe that if I gave him the money, he would be okay. But the other part of me, the man who had been humiliated in front of 200 people, needed to know. I opened the clasp. I pulled out the stack of papers. The top sheet was a summary. I read the first line and my stomach dropped. I felt the bile rise in my throat. I had to take a sip of water to keep from retching right there on the table. Vance lit a cigarette, ignoring the no smoking sign. "Go ahead," he said. "Read the details. It gets worse." I turned the page. It was a credit report for Trey Miller. The new name came with old habits. The numbers were staggering. $200,000 in credit card debt. I stared at the itemized list. It wasn't debt from student loans. It wasn't debt from medical bills. It was debt from vanity. There was a charge for $12,000 for a watch, a Rolex. I remembered seeing it on his wrist at the wedding. He had told me it was a gift from a client. It was a lie. He had bought it on credit at 24% interest. There were charges for tailored suits, $5,000 each. Charges for dinners at restaurants where a salad cost more than my weekly grocery bill. Charges for a lease on a luxury apartment downtown that cost $6,000 a month. He was drowning, and instead of swimming to shore, he was buying golden weights to tie around his ankles. I turned to Skylar's section. If Trey was drowning, Skylar was the one holding his head under the water. Her financial history was a disaster zone. There were loans from 3 different payday lenders. The interest rates were criminal, 300%. But the real shock was the bank statements. Thousands of dollars transferred to offshore accounts. "What is this?" I asked Vance, pointing to the transfers. "Online gambling," Vance said, blowing smoke towards the ceiling. "Poker, slots, you name it. She is an addict, Wallace. A high-functioning one, but an addict all the same. She loses $5,000 on a Tuesday night on her phone while lying in bed next to your son. Then she takes out a loan to cover it. She has been robbing Peter to pay Paul for years, but now Peter is broke and Paul is coming with a baseball bat." I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. My daughter-in-law, the woman who looked down her nose at my house, was a degenerate gambler. The woman who lectured me about financial management couldn't manage a piggy bank without breaking it. "But that is not the worst part," Vance said, leaning in. His eyes were hard. "Look at the last page, Wallace. The one marked confidential." I flipped to the back. It was a copy of an internal audit report from the architecture firm where Trey worked. My hands started to shake so hard I could barely hold the paper. Embezzlement. The word seemed to jump off the page and slap me. Trey had been moving funds, small amounts at first, then larger. He was billing clients for materials that were never ordered. He was padding invoices. He was stealing from his own company. The total amount missing was $150,000. "The audit is dated 2 weeks ago," Vance said quietly. "The firm knows. They have given him a deadline. He has until the end of this month to replace the funds, or they go to the district attorney. That is why he changed his name Wallace. He thought maybe if he became a Miller, the scandal wouldn't follow him, or maybe he just wanted to distance himself from you before the handcuffs clicked. But mainly, he is terrified. He is looking at 5 to 10 years in state prison." I put the paper down. The diner suddenly felt very small and very hot. I couldn't breathe. My son wasn't just a snob. He wasn't just ungrateful. He was a criminal. He was a thief. "And that is why they came to you," Vance continued. "They do not care about you. They do not care about your health. They need $15 million because they have a hole in their life that is getting bigger by the second. They want to pay off the firm to avoid jail. Then they want to pay off the bookies. And then, knowing them, they will burn through the rest of your money in 5 years." I closed my eyes. I saw Trey's face in the kitchen. I saw the fake tears. I heard him say, "We are doing this because we love you, Dad." It was all a lie. Every single word. They were not trying to protect me from scammers. They were the scammers. They were the wolves in sheep's clothing, and I had almost let them into the hen house. I sat there for a long time. The waitress came by to refill my coffee, but I waved her away. I looked at the rain streaking the window. I thought about the little boy I used to carry on my shoulders. I thought about the man who stood in my living room and told me my name was Dirt. If I gave them the money, I could keep him out of prison. I could pay off the debts. I could wipe the slate clean. That is what a father is supposed to do, isn't it? Save his child. But then I looked at the Rolex charge again. I looked at the gambling debts. If I saved him now, what would happen next year? He would steal again. He would lie again. He would learn that there are no consequences for his actions because Daddy will always be there to write a check. I realized then that money wouldn't save Trey. Money was the drug that was killing him. Giving him $15 million would be like giving a heroin addict a mountain of pure opium. It wouldn't save him. It would destroy him completely. He didn't need a bailout. He needed a wake-up call. I looked at Vance. "Does anyone else know about this?" "Not yet," Vance said. "But the firm is getting impatient. The clock is ticking." I gathered the papers and put them back in the envelope. I folded the metal clasp down. The sound was final. "Thank you, Vance," I said. I pulled out a roll of cash and placed it on the table. "This covers your fee and a bonus. You did good work." "What are you going to do?" Vance asked. "Are you going to cut them a check?" I stood up. I buttoned my raincoat. I felt heavy, but I also felt strong. I felt like the steel I used to forge. Hard, unbending. "No," I said. "I am not going to cut them a check. I am going to let them hit the bottom." Vance raised an eyebrow. "That is a hard road, Wallace. Prison changes a man. So does betrayal," I said. "My son is already in a prison of his own making, a prison of greed and lies. If I pay his bail, he will never break out. He needs to see the walls he built. He needs to feel the cold floor." I picked up the envelope. "I am going home," I said. I have a meeting at 9 a.m., and I have some paperwork of my own to prepare. I walked out of the diner into the rain. The water felt good on my face. It felt cleansing. I wasn't confused anymore. I wasn't the sad old man they thought I was. I was Wallace Jefferson. And I was about to teach my son that the name he hated was the only thing that had any real value left in this world, and he had already sold it for a cheap watch and a lie. He wanted the inheritance of a miller. Well, he was about to get it. The debt, the shame, and the consequences. I got into my truck and started the engine. The road ahead was dark, but my headlights cut through it. I knew exactly where I was going. For 3 days, I became a ghost to my own son. I did not answer the phone. I did not reply to the text messages that started out polite and slowly turned into frantic demands. I disconnected the doorbell. I sat in my living room with the curtains drawn and listened to the silence. It was a heavy silence, but it was not empty. It was the silence of a chess player waiting for the opponent to make a desperate move. I knew exactly what was happening on the other side of town. Vance had told me about the deadlines. The architecture firm was demanding the missing money by Friday. The bookies were making threats. The credit card companies were calling every hour. Trey and Skylar were trapped in a burning building, and the only exit was through my bank account. I knew they would come back. Desperation has a smell, and I could smell it all the way from my front porch. I just did not know how low they were willing to stoop until they showed up on my doorstep that Wednesday afternoon. I was in the garden pruning the rose bushes that Esther had planted 20 years ago. The thorns were sharp, but I didn't wear gloves. I liked feeling the resistance of the wood. I heard the car door slam. It wasn't the confident slam of a luxury car owner anymore. It was an angry, aggressive sound. I didn't turn around. I kept cutting the dead branches. Snip, snip, snip. I heard their footsteps on the gravel. They were walking fast. "Dad," Trey's voice was tight. It sounded like a wire about to snap. "Dad, why aren't you answering your phone?" "We have been worried sick." I turned around slowly. They looked terrible. Skylar was wearing big sunglasses, but they couldn't hide the tension in her jaw. She wasn't wearing her usual designer suit. She was wearing sweatpants and a loose t-shirt. Trey looked like he hadn't slept in 48 hours. His eyes were bloodshot and his hands were twitching at his sides. "I have been busy," I said calmly. I went back to pruning the roses. "Old people get busy too, Trey." "Busy doing what?" Skylar snapped. She marched over to me and stood right in my personal space. Her perfume was overpowering. It smelled like desperate ambition. "We are trying to help you, Wallace. We are trying to protect your assets, and you are playing games. Do you have any idea how dangerous it is for a man your age to be uncontactable? Anything could have happened to you." I looked at her. I looked at the fear behind her sunglasses. It wasn't fear for my safety. It was fear that the $15 million had walked away. "I am fine, Skylar," I said. "I just needed time to think." "We do not have time," Skylar hissed. She realized her mistake and quickly corrected her tone. "I mean, you do not have time, Wallace. The markets are volatile. Every day that money sits in a standard account, you are losing potential interest. We need to set up the trust fund today. Right now. We brought the notary with us. He is waiting in the car." I looked at the silver Mercedes. There was a man sitting in the back seat looking uncomfortable. They had brought a notary. They were planning to ambush me. They wanted to force my signature right here among the roses. "I told you," I said. "I am not ready. I need to pray on it." Trey stepped forward. He grabbed my arm. His grip was hard. Too hard. "Dad, stop this. Stop being stubborn. We are doing this for the family. You have to sign the papers. You have to." I looked at his hand on my arm. Then I looked at his face. I saw the panic there. I saw the looming shadow of prison in his eyes. He was terrified. But instead of confessing, instead of asking for help like a man, he was trying to bully me like a criminal. I pulled my arm away. "Do not touch me," I said. My voice was low, but it stopped him cold. Skylar stepped between us. She took a deep breath. She reached into her oversized purse. Her movements were slow and deliberate. She looked like a poker player about to reveal a royal flush. "Fine, Wallace," she said. "If you want to be stubborn, that is your choice. But choices have consequences. We didn't want to do this. We wanted to handle this like a civilized family. But you are forcing our hand." She pulled out a small black and white photograph. It was glossy. She held it up to my face. "Do you know what this is?" she asked. I looked at the image. It was grainy and blurry, but I knew exactly what it was. It was an ultrasound. A tiny gray bean in a sea of black. A heartbeat. A life. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the picture. I forgot about the money. I forgot about the betrayal. For a split second, I was just a grandfather looking at the future. "You are pregnant," I whispered. Skylar nodded. She didn't smile. There was no joy in her face. There was only cold, hard leverage. 12 weeks, she said. "It is a boy. A boy. A grandson." A surge of emotion hit me so hard I almost dropped the garden shears. I reached out a hand to touch the picture, but Skylar pulled it away. She tucked it back against her chest. "No," she said sharply. "You do not get to touch it. You do not get to hold it. Not unless you make the right decision." "What do you mean?" I asked. My voice was trembling. Trey looked down at his shoes. He couldn't look me in the eye. Skylar stepped closer. She lowered her voice, and it sounded like a snake sliding through dry leaves. "Here is the situation, Wallace. Trey has received a job offer in New York. A big firm. They want him to start next week." I knew this was a lie. Trey was about to be fired for embezzlement. No one was offering him a job. But I listened. "If we move to New York," Skylar continued, "we will be starting a new life. A completely new life. And in that new life, there is no room for toxic influences. There is no room for a grandfather who doesn't trust his own family." She paused to let the words sink in. "If you do not sign the power of attorney papers today, we are leaving. We are getting in the car and driving north. You will never see this baby. You will never hold him. You will never hear his first words. You will never be at his graduation. He will grow up thinking his grandfather is dead." I felt a coldness spread through my chest. It was a coldness deeper than winter. They were using an innocent child, a baby who hadn't even taken his first breath. They were using him as a bargaining chip in a financial transaction. And the name Skylar added, delivering the final blow. "We have already decided. We have already. If we go to New York, we are legally changing our names. All of us. Including the baby. He will be born a Miller. He will never know the name Jefferson exists. To him, you will just be a ghost story. A cautionary tale about a selfish old man who died alone with his money." I looked at Trey. He was still looking at his shoes. "Is this true?" I asked him. "Is this what you want? To keep my grandson away from me?" Trey looked up. His face was pale. "We have to do what is best for our son, Dad. We need security. If you cannot provide security for this family, then we have to go where we can find it. You are forcing us to choose between you and our future." He was repeating lines she had fed him. I could hear it, but it didn't matter. He was standing there letting his wife threaten to erase my lineage unless I handed over a check. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. They knew my weakness. They knew that despite everything, I loved family. They knew that the idea of a grandson carrying on my name was the only dream I had left, and they were holding a gun to that dream. I looked at the ultrasound picture in Skylar's hand, that tiny gray shape. My blood, my future, and they were holding it hostage for $15 million. I felt a tear roll down my cheek. It was a real tear. I cried for that baby. I cried because he was going to be raised by wolves. I cried because his parents were willing to sell his relationship with his grandfather for a luxury apartment and a clean credit score. But as the tear hit my cheek, something else happened inside me. The trap snapped shut. They had played their final card, and in doing so, they had shown me that they had no bottom. There was no line they wouldn't cross. I needed them to stay. I couldn't let them run to New York, not yet. I needed them here for the party on Saturday. I needed them here for the public reveal. I needed to destroy their greed completely, so that maybe, just maybe, I could save that child from them later. I let my shoulders slump. I dropped the garden shears on the grass. I covered my face with my hands and let out a sob. It was a sob of defeat, or at least that is what I wanted them to think. "Please," I choked out. "Please don't take him away." Skylar smiled. I felt it even though I couldn't see it. It was the smile of a predator who feels the trap close. "Then sign the papers, Wallace," she said softly. "Do it for your grandson. Do it so he can have the life he deserves." I wiped my eyes with my dirty hands, smearing soil on my face. I looked like a broken old man. "I cannot lose him," I said. "He is all I have." "Then show us," Skylar said, holding out the folder. "Show us you care." I reached out a shaking hand. I touched the folder, but I didn't take it. "I will do it," I whispered. "But not like this. Not in the garden." "What do you mean?" Trey asked, stepping forward, eager to close the deal. "I need to do it right," I said. "I need to talk to my lawyer. I need to set it up properly so the government doesn't take half of it. If I am going to provide for my grandson, I want to make sure every penny is safe." Skylar narrowed her eyes. "We can handle the government, Wallace. Just sign the power of attorney." "No," I said, gaining a little strength in my voice. "If I sign this, you get control, but the taxes will eat us alive. I have a better idea. A trust fund. An irrevocable trust fund." Skylar's eyes lit up at the word irrevocable. That meant permanent. That meant I couldn't take it back. "A trust fund?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "A trust fund for the baby. And for you. $15 million locked away safely." I looked at them pleadingly. "Give me until Saturday," I said. "I am hosting a small gathering. My friends from the church, the neighbors. I want to announce it there. I want to celebrate the news of my grandson. I want to sign the papers in front of everyone so the whole world knows that the Jeffersons are a family again." Trey looked at Skylar. "Saturday is 3 days away," he whispered. "We can wait 3 days." Skylar looked at me. She was calculating. She saw a beaten man. She saw a man desperate to see his grandchild. She didn't see a threat. "Saturday," she said. "But that is the deadline, Wallace. If those papers aren't signed by Saturday night, we are leaving Sunday morning, and you will never see us again. I promise," I said. "Saturday. I will give you everything you deserve." Skylar reached into her purse and pulled out the ultrasound picture again. She handed it to me. "Keep it," she said. "A reminder of what is at stake." I took the picture. My fingers brushed hers. Her skin was cold. I held the photo to my chest. "Thank you," I whispered. They turned and walked back to the car. Their step was light. They were almost skipping. They had won. They had broken the old man. They were going to be rich. I watched them drive away. I stood in the garden holding the picture of my unborn grandson. The tear on my cheek dried up. The sorrow in my heart turned into a cold, hard resolve. I looked at the baby. "I am sorry, little one," I whispered to the photo. "I am sorry for what I have to do to your parents. But one day when you are grown, you will understand. I am not doing this to hurt them. I am doing this to save you." I put the picture in my pocket next to the report from the private investigator. I picked up my shears. I went back to the rose bush. There was a branch that was rotten. It was black and diseased, and it was threatening to kill the whole plant. I placed the blades around the rot. I squeezed the handle. With a sharp, clean snap, I cut it off. The rose bush would survive. It would bloom again. But first, the rot had to go. Saturday was coming, and I was going to bring the sharpest shears I had. The silence in my house did not last long. I had bought myself 3 days or so, I thought. I believed that my promise to sign the papers on Saturday gave me time to prepare the final stage of my plan. But I underestimated the greed of my daughter-in-law. Greed is an impatient beast. It does not like to wait. It does not like uncertainty. Skylar must have gone home and stared at the calendar, and the thought of waiting 72 hours while $15 million sat unguarded was too much for her to bear. She convinced Trey that I was a flight risk. She convinced him that a man who tears up checks and talks to rose bushes is not just eccentric, but dangerous. It was Thursday morning when the ambush happened. I was sitting in my kitchen drinking coffee and reading the financial section of the newspaper. I was perfectly lucid. I was tracking the market trends for the tech sector. I was sharp. Then I heard the tires on the gravel. Not one car. 2. I looked out the window and saw the silver Mercedes followed by a white van with a medical logo on the side. My heart hammered against my ribs. They were not waiting for the party. They were making their move now. I barely had time to fold the newspaper and hide it under the cushion of my chair before the pounding started on the door. There was no polite knock today. It was the pounding of authority. I shuffled to the door, making sure to hunch my shoulders and drag my feet. I had to stay in character. If they wanted a senile old man, I would give them a performance worthy of an Academy Award. I opened the door and the hallway was instantly filled with people. Trey was there looking pale and sweaty. Skylar was there looking grim and determined. And behind them were 2 strangers, a man in a white coat holding a clipboard and a woman in a blue nurse uniform carrying a large medical bag. "What is going on?" I asked, letting my voice waver. "Who are these people, Trey?" "We are just here to help Dad," Trey said, but he wouldn't look at me. He looked at the floor. He looked at the walls. He looked anywhere but at the father he was about to betray. Skylar stepped forward, placing a hand on my arm. It felt like a handcuff. "Wallace, this is Dr. Evans and Nurse Ratched. They are from the State Competency Board. We called them because we are terrified for you." "Terrified," I repeated, blinking slowly. "Why?" "Because you are not well." "Wallace," Skylar said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "You have been forgetting things. You have been acting aggressive. You threatened us yesterday. You were talking to people who weren't there. We think you are having a breakdown." I looked at Dr. Evans. He was a tall man with cold gray eyes. He didn't see a person. He saw a case file. He saw a diagnosis waiting to be written. "Mr. Jefferson," the doctor said, stepping into my living room without an invitation, "your family has filed an emergency petition stating that you are a danger to yourself and your estate due to rapid cognitive decline. I am here to conduct a preliminary assessment." I backed away until my legs hit the armchair. I collapsed into it, looking small and frightened. "You want to put me away?" I whispered. "No one wants to put you away, Mr. Jefferson," the doctor said, clicking his pen. "We just need to assess your mental state. If you are competent, you have nothing to worry about. But if you are unable to make sound decisions, it is our duty to appoint a temporary guardian to protect your interests." I looked at Trey. He was standing by the window, wringing his hands. "Trey," I said softly, "son, do not let them do this. I am fine. I am just old." Trey flinched. He looked at Skylar. She gave him a sharp nod. "A command. It is for your own good." "Dad," Trey said, his voice cracking. "You are not thinking straight. The money, the house. It is too much for you. We just want to keep you safe." Safe. That was the word they used to wrap their treachery in. They didn't want to keep me safe. They wanted to keep the money safe from me. The nurse moved a chair to the center of the room. "Please sit here, Mr. Jefferson," she said. I sat. I felt like a prisoner in my own home. The doctor stood over me, blocking out the light from the window. He opened his clipboard. The interrogation began. "Mr. Jefferson, can you tell me your full name?" "Wallace," I said. "Wallace Jefferson." "And what is today's date?" I paused. I looked at the clock on the wall. I looked at Skylar. She was watching me like a hawk watching a mouse. If I answered correctly, they might leave. But if they left, they would come back on Saturday and try again. I needed them to commit. I needed them to put their names on a legal document declaring me incompetent based on lies. I needed them to hang themselves with their own rope. So I decided to fail. But I had to fail carefully. "It is Sunday," I said. "Sunday morning. We are going to church later." The doctor made a mark on his paper. Skylar let out a small breath of relief. "It is Thursday." "Wallace," she whispered loudly enough for the doctor to hear. "See, doctor, he has lost track of time completely." "Who is the current president of the United States, Mr. Jefferson?" the doctor asked. I closed my eyes. I pictured the face of the current president. I knew his name. I knew his policies. But I opened my eyes and looked at Trey. "It is Clinton," I said. "Bill Clinton. A good man." Trey made a noise in his throat, a whimper. He knew I wasn't that gone. He knew I watched the news every night. He knew I was lying, but he didn't say anything. He stayed silent. His silence was his signature on my death warrant. The doctor raised an eyebrow. He scribbled furiously. "Mr. Jefferson, take a look at these 3 objects," the doctor said, pulling a pen, a watch, and a key from his pocket. "Remember them. I will ask you to repeat them in 5 minutes." I nodded, staring at the objects. "Now tell me about your finances," the doctor said, shifting gears. "Do you understand the value of your assets?" I laughed. A high-pitched, nervous laugh. "Money," I said. "I have pension checks. I keep them in the cookie jar. $50, maybe 60. The doctor looked at Skylar. She shook her head dramatically. "He has $15 million pending in a land deal, doctor, and he thinks it is $50. He is completely detached from reality. He is vulnerable to anyone who knocks on the door." The doctor nodded. He had seen enough. He turned to the nurse. "Check his vitals, but I think the preliminary conclusion is clear." The nurse wrapped the cuff around my arm. My blood pressure was high, but that was from rage, not confusion. Dr. Evans turned to Trey. Mr. Miller, based on this assessment, your father is showing signs of advanced dementia. He is disoriented to time and place. He lacks capacity to understand his financial situation. I am recommending an emergency temporary conservatorship. Trey looked sick. Is that necessary right now? He asked. Yes, Schuyler interrupted, stepping forward. It is absolutely necessary. Look at him, Trey. He thinks it is 1995. If we leave him alone, he could burn the house down, or sign the deed over to the mailman. We need to secure the assets immediately. She pulled a document from her bag. She had it ready. Of course she had it ready. This is the petition for emergency guardianship, she said, handing it to Trey. Dr. Evans just needs to countersign it. Then we file it at the courthouse within the hour. By this afternoon, we will have legal control. We can move him to a facility where he can get proper care. A facility. They were going to put me in a home. They weren't just taking the money. They were taking my freedom. Trey held the pen. He looked at me. I sat in the chair, my mouth slightly open, my hands twitching in my lap. I looked helpless. I looked defeated. Dad, Trey whispered, I am sorry. Then he signed. He pressed the pen to the paper and signed away my rights. He signed away his father's dignity. He signed his soul over to the devil for $15 million. Dr. Evans took the paper and signed it too. It is done, Schuyler said. Her eyes were shining. She looked at me with triumph. We will be back this evening, Wallace. We are going to pack a bag for you. We found a lovely place called Shady Pines. It has a garden. You will like it there. I didn't say anything. I just stared at the wall. Let us go, Trey, Schuyler said, grabbing her husband's arm. We have to get to the courthouse before they close for lunch. They gathered their things. The whirlwind of destruction packed up its circus. The doctor nodded to me dismissively. The nurse patted my hand like I was a toddler. Goodbye, Mr. Jefferson, she said. Try to stay calm. They walked out the door. I heard Schuyler laughing as they walked down the path. I heard her say, I told you it would be easy. I heard the car doors slam. I heard the engine start. I listened until the sound of the tires faded into the distance. I sat there for 1 minute longer, just to be sure. Then I stood up. I walked to the window and watched the empty road. My posture straightened. The twitch in my hand vanished. The fog in my eyes cleared instantly. I walked to the kitchen and reached into the high cabinet. I pulled out a bottle of single malt whiskey. The good stuff. I had been saving it for Trey's wedding, but he hadn't deserved a toast then. I poured a shot into a crystal glass. I held it up to the light. The amber liquid glowed. I drank it in one swallow. It burned going down. A good, clean burn. I walked to the phone and dialed a number. Banks picked up on the first ring. It is Wallace, I said. My voice was strong. My voice was iron. Did they do it? Banks asked. They did, I said. They brought a doctor. They staged an exam. And Trey signed the petition. He signed a sworn affidavit stating, I am incompetent. He committed perjury, Banks. He lied to the court to facilitate a theft. And the doctor Banks asked. He signed it too. Malpractice. Conspiracy. Banks let out a low whistle. We have them, Wallace. We have them on tape. The cameras captured everything. The audio is crystal clear. You answering wrong on purpose. Schuyler coaching the doctor. Trey admitting he knows you are not that bad, but signing anyway. It is all there. File the counter motion, I said. And Banks make sure the district attorney gets a copy of the tape. You want to send your son to jail? Banks asked quietly. I looked around my empty, silent house. I looked at the spot where Trey had stood and signed my life away. He didn't hesitate to send me to a nursing home, I said. He didn't hesitate to erase me. He made his choice. Now he has to live with it. I hung up the phone. I went back to the armchair and pulled out the newspaper. I turned to the crossword puzzle. I filled in the answers with a pen. I didn't make a single mistake. I was not crazy. I was not old. I was angry. And on Saturday, when they came back to take me away, they were going to find out that the lion they thought was sleeping was actually wide awake and waiting for them to step into the cage. The courtroom smelled of furniture polish and old lies. I sat at the defendant's table with my hands folded on the polished wood. My lawyer, Arthur Banks, sat next to me, organizing his files with a terrifying calmness. On the other side of the aisle, my son Trey sat next to Schuyler. They were holding hands. To the casual observer, they looked like a young couple terrified for the well-being of an aging parent. To me, they looked like vultures waiting for the animal to stop twitching so they could begin the feast. The judge was a woman named Eleanor Vance. She had gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that had seen every version of family betrayal imaginable. She peered over her reading glasses at Trey, who was currently in the witness box. He was putting on the performance of a lifetime. He had even brought a handkerchief which he dabbed at his dry eyes every few seconds. "Mr. Miller, the judge," said her voice echoing in the high ceiling room. "Please explain to the court why you believe an emergency conservatorship is necessary for your father." Trey took a shaky breath. He looked at me for a split second before turning his gaze to the judge. "It breaks my heart to be here, Your Honor. It truly does. My father has always been my hero. He was a strong man, a steel worker. But in the last 6 months, he has just faded away." He paused for effect. Skylar reached out and touched his shoulder supportively. "He forgets to eat." Trey continued, his voice trembling. "Last week I went to his house and found him trying to eat soup with a fork. He didn't understand why it wasn't working. He gets confused about money. He thinks it is still 1980. He burns cash in the sink because he thinks it is trash." I tightened my grip on my own hands. The lie was so specific, so cruel. He was using the memory of me teaching him table manners as a child and twisting it into a weapon. "And the incident on Thursday?" the judge asked. Trey nodded. "He became aggressive. He started shouting about people stealing his house. He didn't know who I was. He called me by his brother's name, a brother who died 10 years ago. We called Dr. Evans because we were scared he might hurt himself. He has access to a large sum of money from a land sale, and we are terrified he is going to give it away to a scammer or set it on fire. We just want to protect him. We want to put him in a facility where he can be safe." He looked at me with tears streaming down his face, real wet tears. I wondered if he was crying for me or for the money he thought he was about to get. "I love my dad," Trey sobbed. "Please, Your Honor, don't let him destroy himself. Give us the legal power to save him." The courtroom was silent. I could feel the eyes of the bailiff and the clerk on me. They looked at me with pity. They saw a confused old man who needed his son's help. Trey stepped down from the stand and walked back to his table. Skylar squeezed his hand and whispered something in his ear. She looked triumphant. They thought it was over. They thought the Weeping Sun Act was a slam dunk. Mr. Banks stood up. He buttoned his suit jacket slowly. He didn't look at Trey. He looked at the judge. "Your Honor," Banks said, his voice low and smooth like expensive whiskey, "we do not wish to cross-examine the plaintiff." Skylar smiled. She thought we were surrendering. However, Banks continued walking to the center of the room. "We would like to submit a piece of evidence that directly contradicts Mr. Miller's testimony regarding his father's cognitive abilities." Evidence. Skylar's lawyer stood up. "Objection. We were not notified of any evidence." "It is rebuttal evidence, Your Honor," Banks said calmly. "It addresses the specific claims made by the witness just now regarding the events of this week." The judge nodded. "Proceed, Mr. Banks." Banks pulled a small remote control from his pocket. He pointed it at the large television screen mounted on the wall to the left of the judge's bench. "Mr. Miller claims his father cannot eat properly and does not understand the year," Banks said. "Let us look at the morning of Wednesday, just 2 days ago." The screen flickered to life. It was a high-definition video feed. The angle was from the ceiling of my living room. The image was crystal clear. It showed me sitting at my kitchen table. I wasn't eating soup with a fork. I was sitting with a pen and a newspaper. "Your Honor," Banks narrated, "this is a time-stamped video from the security system Mr. Jefferson had installed last year. Please observe what he is doing." On the screen, I was filling out a crossword puzzle. "Zoom in, please," Banks said to his assistant. The video zoomed in on the newspaper. "Mr. Jefferson is completing the New York Times Sunday crossword," Banks said. "It is widely considered one of the most difficult puzzles in the country. He finished it in 12 minutes. Without a dictionary." There was a murmur in the courtroom. Trey shifted in his seat. "Now let us look at his financial confusion," Banks said. The video changed. It showed me sitting in front of my laptop. The screen of the laptop was visible. I was logged into a brokerage account. "Here's Mr. Jefferson executing a limit order for tech stocks," Banks explained. "He is analyzing a price-to-earnings ratio chart. He is not burning money. Your Honor, he is multiplying it." The judge leaned forward. Her eyes narrowed. She looked from the screen to me and then to Trey. Trey was starting to sweat. He loosened his tie. "But the most important clip is this one," Banks said. His voice hardened. "Mr. Miller claimed he visited his father on Thursday to save him because he was agitated. Let us listen to the audio from that visit." The video switched to the scene with the doctor. It showed me sitting in the chair. It showed Skylar standing over me. The audio filled the courtroom. It was loud and clear. It is Thursday. Wallace Schuyler's voice hissed from the speakers. See, doctor, he has lost track of time completely. Then the video showed the moment the doctor turned away. The camera caught Trey leaning in. Dad, I am sorry, Trey whispered on the tape. And then the most damning part. The camera angle from the hallway captured the moment they thought they were alone. Schuyler laughing. I told you it would be easy, Schuyler said on the recording. He is gone. We will have the money by Friday. Banks paused the video on Schuyler's smiling, predatory face. Your Honor, Banks said, turning to the judge. This was not a rescue mission. This was a staged entrapment. The plaintiff and his wife coached the doctor. They lied about Mr. Jefferson's condition. And they did it for one reason only. Banks placed a copy of Trey's credit report on the judge's bench. They are insolvent, Your Honor. They are $200,000 in debt and facing embezzlement charges. They tried to declare this man incompetent not because he is crazy, but because he is rich. The silence in the courtroom was now heavy and dangerous. It wasn't pity anymore. It was shock. Trey was white as a sheet. He looked like he was going to vomit. Schuyler was gripping the table so hard her knuckles were yellow. She tried to stand up. This is a violation of privacy, she shrieked. You cannot film us without our consent. Sit down, the judge barked. The sound was like a whip crack. Schuyler collapsed back into her chair. Judge Vance took off her glasses. She looked at Trey. Her expression was one of pure disgust. Mr. Miller, stand up, she said. Trey stood up. His legs were shaking. I have sat on this bench for 20 years, the judge said quietly. I have seen drug dealers. I have seen murderers. But I have never seen a son try to bury his father alive for a payday. Trey stammered. Silence, the judge ordered. You lied under oath. You filed a false petition. You wasted the court's time, and you tried to strip a citizen of his civil rights based on perjury. She slammed her gavel down. It sounded like a gunshot. The petition for conservatorship is dismissed with prejudice. That means you cannot file it again, ever. And Mr. Miller, I am forwarding the transcript of this hearing and this video evidence to the district attorney's office. I suggest you get a criminal defense lawyer because you are going to need one for the perjury charges coming your way. Trey looked at me. His eyes were wide with terror. He wanted me to save him. He wanted his daddy to make the bad judge go away. I just looked at him. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I just looked at him the way you look at a stranger on the street. Get out of my courtroom, the judge said, before I hold you in contempt. Trey grabbed his briefcase. He fumbled with the latch. He couldn't get it closed. He abandoned it on the table. He grabbed Schuyler's arm. They practically ran down the center aisle. Everyone watched them go. The court reporter, the bailiff, the strangers in the back row. They watched the golden couple fleeing like cockroaches when the light turns on. The double doors swung shut behind them with a heavy thud. The judge looked at me. Her face softened. Mr. Jefferson, she said, I am sorry you had to go through this. You are free to go. And sir, if you want my advice, change your locks. I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. Thank you. Your Honor, I said, the locks are already changed, and so is the will. I walked out of the courtroom. The air in the hallway tasted sweet. It tasted like victory. But underneath the sweetness there was the bitter aftertaste of loss. I had won the battle. I had kept my freedom. But I had lost the last shred of hope that my son was a good man. Banks walked beside me. He put a hand on my shoulder. Are you okay, Wallace? He asked. I checked my watch. It was noon. I am fine, Arthur, I said. We have work to do. The party is tomorrow. And now that the legal threats are gone, I can focus on the final lesson. You are still going through with it, Banks asked, even after this. Especially after this, I said. They tried to take my dignity, Arthur. Now I am going to take their future. I walked out into the sunshine. The city looked different today. It looked cleaner. I hailed a taxi. I gave the driver my address. I was going home to prepare for a wedding reception, a reception where the groom wouldn't be there but his inheritance would be the guest of honor. And I had a special speech prepared, one that would make the first one seem like a nursery rhyme. Friday morning arrived, not with the promise of a weekend, but with the brutal weight of consequences. I was sitting on my porch drinking coffee and watching the birds, but across town my son was watching his life disintegrate brick by brick. The judge had been true to her word. She had sent the transcripts of the hearing to the district attorney, but she had also sent a courtesy copy to the senior partners at Trey's architecture firm. In the corporate world, bad news travels faster than light. Trey arrived at his glass-walled office at 8 in the morning hoping to salvage his career. He didn't even make it past the lobby. Security guards were waiting for him. They were not the friendly guards who used to wave him through. They were stony-faced men with orders. They handed him a cardboard box containing his personal effects, a stapler, a picture frame, a coffee mug. They told him he was terminated for cause effective immediately. They told him that the firm was pressing charges for the embezzlement of $150,000. They escorted him out of the building in front of his colleagues, the people he had sneered at, the people he had bragged to about his wealthy wife and his bright future. They watched him walk out to the curb holding his box of shame. But the humiliation was just getting started. When he got to the parking garage, his key fob didn't work. He pressed the button over and over again in a panic. A tow truck was already there. The leasing company had been alerted to his credit default. The repo man didn't care that Trey was wearing a $3,000 suit. He didn't care that Trey was screaming about a misunderstanding. He hooked the chains to the bumper of the silver Mercedes, the car that Trey loved more than he loved his own father, the car that was his identity. Trey watched as it was lifted into the air and dragged away, leaving him standing on the oil-stained concrete with nothing but a cardboard box and a maxed-out credit card. He had to take the bus home. I can only imagine the ride, sitting on a plastic seat surrounded by the working-class people he despised, smelling the exhaust and the sweat, realizing that he was no longer a prince of the city. He was just another broke man with a criminal record pending. When he finally walked through the door of his luxury apartment, Skylar was waiting. But she wasn't waiting with comfort. She wasn't waiting with a plan to fix it together. She was waiting with suitcases. I heard about the firing, she screamed before he could even put his box down. Her voice was shrill, shattering the carefully curated silence of their expensive home. My friend at the firm texted me, "Everyone knows Trey. Everyone knows you are a thief." Trey tried to touch her arm. "Honey, please," he begged. "We can fix this. I can get another job." "Who is going to hire you?" Skylar yelled, pulling away from him as if he were contagious. "You are a felon. You are toxic." And now the car is gone. I saw the alert on my phone. She zipped up a Louis Vuitton suitcase with a violent motion. "I am done," she said. "I am not going down with this ship. I am not going to be the wife of a jailbird. I have a reputation in the city." Trey fell to his knees. He was weeping, a pathetic broken sound. "But Skylar, what about the baby? What about our son?" "That is why I am leaving," she said coldly. "I am not raising a child in a halfway house. I am going to my mother's. I am filing for divorce on Monday." Divorce. The word hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Trey looked at her. He realized then that she had never loved him. She had loved the lifestyle he provided. She had loved the illusion of success. Now that the curtain was pulled back, she looked at him with nothing but contempt. "Please," he sobbed. "Don't leave me. I have nothing else." "You should have thought of that before you tried to con your father and failed," she spat. "You are a loser, Trey. A Miller would have closed the deal. You are just a Jefferson after all." She reached for the door handle. It was the end. He was going to lose his wife, his child, his job, and his freedom all in the span of 24 hours. And then his phone rang. It lay on the floor where he had dropped it. It buzzed aggressively against the hardwood. Skylar stopped. She looked at the screen. The name displayed was Dad. She looked at Trey. "Don't answer it," she said. "He is just calling to gloat." But Trey didn't listen. He crawled across the floor. He grabbed the phone like it was a life preserver in a storm. He swiped the green button. "Dad," he choked out. I sat in my armchair holding the receiver. I could hear his breathing. It was ragged and wet. I could hear the background noise of a house in chaos. I knew exactly what moment I had interrupted. "Hello, son," I said. My voice was not angry. It was not triumphant. It was tired. It was the voice of an old man who has seen too much war. "Dad, I am so sorry," Trey wept. "You were right. You were right about everything. I lost my job. Skylar is leaving. They took the car. I am going to jail." I let him cry for a moment. I let the silence stretch out. "I know," I said softly. "I know everything." "You do?" he asked, his voice small. "Yes. And I know about the baby," Trey gasped. "Please don't hate him, Dad. He hasn't done anything wrong." I leaned back in my chair. This was the moment. The pivot point. "I don't hate anyone, Trey," I said. I am just disappointed. But listening to you now, hearing you cry, I realize something. You are still my boy, and that baby is still my blood. I heard Skylar stop moving in the background. I knew she was listening. What are you saying, Dad? Trey asked. I am saying that I cannot sit here on a pile of gold while my grandson grows up in poverty, I said. I cannot let the Jefferson line end in a prison cell. I have spent the last 2 days thinking, and I have made a decision. Trey held his breath. I have $15 million, I said. It is too much for one old man. I cannot take it with me when I die, and I do not want to give it to the government. Skylar was definitely listening now. I could hear her walking back towards the phone. I have instructed Mr. Banks to draft a trust fund. I continued lying with the smooth precision of a surgeon. An irrevocable trust. $15 million. For who? Trey whispered. For the family, I said. For you. For Skylar. And most importantly, for the baby. I want to secure your future. I want to pay off the debts. I want to make the embezzlement charges disappear. Trey started to sob again, but this time it was with relief. Oh, God. Thank you, Dad. Thank you. I don't deserve it. No, you don't, I said sternly. You tried to bury me. You hurt me deeply. I know I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you. I don't want your apologies, Trey, I said. I want your presence. Anything, Dad. Anything. Skylar snatched the phone from Trey's hand. Her voice was suddenly sweet again. It was a miracle recovery. Wallace, she said, breathless. We are so grateful. We were just having a moment. The stress, you know. But we love you. We want to be a family. I closed my eyes, fighting back the wave of disgust. She was ready to leave him 10 seconds ago. Now that the checkbook was open, she was the devoted wife again. I am glad to hear that, Skylar, I said, because I have one condition. Just one. Name it, she said. The trust fund papers are ready, I said, but I will not sign them in private. I will not sign them in the dark like you tried to make me do. I want to sign them in the light. Okay, she said. Where? My party, I said. Saturday afternoon. Tomorrow. At the community center. I have invited everyone. The neighbors. The church group. Even some of your friends, Skylar. You want us to come to the party, she asked. I want you to be the guests of honor, I said. I want to stand on that stage and introduce you as my family. I want to publicly hand over the legacy to my son and my grandson. I want everyone to see that the Jeffersons are united. That is all, Skylar asked. She sounded suspicious. It seemed too easy. That is all, I said. You show up, you stand by my side, you accept the name Jefferson, and the $15 million is yours. We will be there, Skylar said. We will be there with bells on. Good, I said. Bring the baby pictures. I want to show them off. I hung up the phone. I sat there in the silence. I pictured them in that apartment, the suitcases being unpacked, the tears drying up, the champagne popping. They were celebrating. They thought the old man had folded. They thought that blood was their get-out-of-jail-free card. They didn't understand. I wasn't offering them an olive branch. I was offering them a blindfold. They thought the condition was just to show up. They didn't listen to my words carefully. I said I would give the money to the family. I said I would give it to the Jeffersons. And tomorrow, when the lawyer read the fine print, they would realize that by becoming Millers, they had legally disqualified themselves from the very family they were pretending to love. I stood up and walked to the closet. I pulled out my best suit, the black one. I brushed the lint off the shoulders. Tomorrow wasn't a party. It was a funeral for their greed, and I was going to deliver the eulogy with a smile on my face. Saturday afternoon arrived with a sky so blue it looked painted, but inside the Moonlight Hotel ballroom, the atmosphere was heavy with anticipation. I had rented the exact same room where my son had humiliated me just 6 days ago. It cost me another $40,000, but it was worth every penny to set the stage for what was about to happen. The staff looked confused. They had just cleaned up the debris of the wedding, and now here I was throwing another party. They whispered among themselves, thinking I was a lonely old man trying to recreate a moment that had gone wrong. They did not know that I wasn't recreating a memory, I was performing an exorcism. I stood at the back of the room watching the guests arrive. This was not the crowd from the wedding. There were no socialites from the north side. There were no colleagues from the architecture firm looking down their noses at the hors d'oeuvres. I had invited my people, the people who made me who I am. Deacon Jones was there leaning on his cane wearing the same black suit he had worn to church for 20 years. Mrs. Higgins, who ran the soup kitchen where Esther used to volunteer, was there wearing her best Sunday hat. There were men I had worked with at the steel mill, men with hands as hard as oak and backs bent from decades of labor. There were the young students from the community college whom I had mentored quietly over the years. They filled the room with a warmth that had been missing last week. They laughed loudly. They hugged with both arms. They didn't care that the champagne was expensive. They just cared that we were together. I walked among them, shaking hands and accepting condolences for a wife who had been gone for years, and congratulations for a fortune they had only heard rumors about. They looked at me with respect. To them, I wasn't a bank account. I was Wallace. I was the man who always brought potato salad to the potluck and who never forgot a birthday. It felt good. It felt like putting on a comfortable pair of boots after walking a mile in shoes that were too tight. But the peace was broken at exactly 2 o'clock. The double doors swung open with a theatrical flair that silenced the conversation near the entrance. Trey and Skylar walked in. They paused on the threshold, waiting for the applause that did not come. They were dressed for a magazine cover, not a family gathering. Trey was wearing a new suit, likely bought on the credit card he thought I was about to pay off. Skylar was wearing a red silk dress that hugged her body and screamed for attention. It was a dress meant for a red carpet, not a Saturday afternoon reception with church elders. They scanned the room, and I saw the disappointment wash over their faces. They were expecting senators and bankers. They were expecting the elite. Instead, they saw the deacon and the mill workers. Skylar's lip curled in that familiar sneer. She leaned into Trey and whispered something. I could read her lips. She asked him why we were surrounded by nobodies. Trey shrugged, looking embarrassed. He smoothed his tie and put on his mask, the mask of the dutiful son. I stayed in the shadows watching them work the room. It was painful to watch. They moved through the crowd like tourists in a foreign country. They shook hands, but they wiped their palms on their clothes afterwards. They smiled, but their eyes were cold. They were acting. They were enduring this hour of socializing because they thought there was a pot of gold at the end of it. I moved closer so I could hear them. They were standing near the buffet table, ignoring the food. Just keep smiling, Skylar hissed at Trey while waving at Mrs. Higgins. We only have to do this for an hour. Once he signs the papers, we can leave. I cannot believe he invited these people, Trey muttered. It smells like a nursing home in here. Focus on the prize, Skylar said, taking a sip of champagne. I saw a listing this morning, Trey. A mansion in the Hamptons. It has 10 bedrooms and a private beach. With $15 million, we can buy it cash and still have enough to start your own firm. We will be the kings of New York. Trey's eyes lit up. You really think he will just hand it over? He has to, Skylar said confidently. He is desperate for a relationship with his grandson. Did you see his face when I showed him the ultrasound? He folded like a cheap lawn chair. He is weak, Trey. He is a sentimental old fool who thinks money can buy love. We are going to take the money and give him a phone call once a month. That is the deal. I stood behind a pillar, my heart pounding a slow, steady rhythm. They were already spending the money. They were already planning their escape. They called me weak. They called me a fool. They had no idea that the man they were mocking was holding the scissors that would cut their parachute strings. Trey spotted me across the room. His face lit up with fake joy. Dad, he shouted, waving his hand. He walked over, dragging Skylar with him. They hugged me. It was a suffocating, perfumed hug. This is wonderful, Wallace, Skylar gushed. What a lovely turnout. All your old friends are here. I looked her in the eye. Yes, Skylar, my friends. The people who stood by me when I had nothing. Unlike some people who only show up when the bank account is full. Skylar laughed, a nervous tinkling sound. Oh, Wallace, you have such a dry sense of humor. So, when are we doing the announcement? We really have to get going soon. My mother is expecting us for dinner. Soon, I said. Very soon. I pulled away from them. I need to prepare, I said. Go sit down. I reserved the front table for you, right in front of the stage. They walked to the front table, their heads held high. They sat down and checked their phones, ignoring the deacon who tried to say hello. They looked like royalty waiting for their subjects to pay tribute. I walked to the stage. The room went quiet. The chatter died down. The clinking of glasses stopped. All eyes turned to me. I walked up the stairs. My legs felt strong. Last week when I walked out of this room, I felt like a ghost. Today I felt like a mountain. I stood behind the podium. I placed my hands on the wood. I looked out at the sea of faces. I saw the love in Mrs. Higgins' eyes. I saw the respect in the deacon's nod. And then I looked at the front table. I saw Trey and Skylar. They were smiling up at me. It was the smile of a hunter who sees the deer walk into the clearing. They were ready to eat. I reached for the microphone. My hand was steady. There was no tremor. There was no hesitation. The cool metal felt good against my skin. It felt like a weapon. I took a deep breath. The air in the room felt electric. "Welcome, friends," I said. My voice boomed through the speakers, strong and clear. "Thank you for coming back to this place. Last week we gathered here for a wedding, but today we gather for something much more important. Today we gather for the truth." Trey nodded encouragingly. He thought I was talking about the truth of our family reconciliation. He thought I was about to announce the trust fund. He gave me a thumbs up. I looked at his thumb. I looked at his face. And for the first time in days, I smiled. It was a genuine smile, because I knew that in 5 minutes that thumb would be wiping away tears of regret. "I am here to make a very large financial announcement," I continued. Skylar squeezed Trey's hand. She leaned forward. Her eyes were wide. She was practically drooling. But before I sign any checks, I said, letting the silence hang for a moment, "I need to tell you a story about a name, and what that name costs." I signaled to the lawyer standing in the wings. Arthur Banks walked out holding a thick leather folder. He looked solemn. He placed the folder on the podium next to me. Trey looked confused. He saw the folder. He saw the lawyer. He didn't see a checkbook. He started to look uneasy. But it was too late. The train had left the station, and there were no brakes. I opened the folder. "My son Trey said last week that he hated his last name," I said, looking directly at him. "He said it was dirty. He said it was broken." "Well, today we are going to see exactly how much that broken name is worth." I saw the color drain from Skylar's face. She knew. In that split second, she knew something was wrong. But she couldn't stop it. No one could stop it. The cleansing had begun. The microphone felt cold in my hand, but my grip was warm and steady. I looked out at the sea of faces in the ballroom. I saw the anticipation in their eyes. They thought they were about to witness a lottery winner sharing his luck. They thought this was a celebration of wealth. But then I looked down at the front table. I saw Trey and Skylar. They were holding hands. Their knuckles were white. They were not looking at me with love. They were looking at me with the hunger of wolves staring at a wounded deer. They were already spending the money in their minds. They were buying the house in the Hamptons. They were buying the respect they could never earn. I took a breath. It was a deep, cleansing breath. "Before we get to the numbers," I said, my voice filling the room without a tremor, "I need to talk about the price of admission. I need to talk about the name that is written on the check." Trey shifted in his seat. He looked annoyed. He wanted me to skip the preamble and get to the payout. He checked his watch. He probably had a real estate agent waiting for his call. "My son told me last week that he hated his last name." I continued looking directly at him. He didn't blink. He just kept that frozen fake smile plastered on his face. He said the name Jefferson smelled of dirt. He said it was a chain that held him back. He said it was the name of servants and slaves. He wanted a name that sounded like it belonged in a boardroom. He wanted a name that was clean. I paused. I saw Mrs. Higgins in the second row nod her head slowly. She knew. She remembered. "Let me tell you where that name comes from," I said. My voice dropped an octave. It became gravel and iron. "My grandfather did not have a last name when he was born. He was property. When he finally walked off that plantation, he didn't pick a name because it sounded fancy. He picked the name Jefferson because it was the name of a president. He picked it because he wanted to demand the same respect as the man on the nickel. He carried that name while he was beaten for trying to vote. He carried that name while he built a schoolhouse with his bare hands so his children could learn to read. I lifted my own hands. I held them up to the light. My father carried that name into a war where he fought for a country that wouldn't let him sit at the front of the bus. And I carried that name into the steel mill every single day for 40 years. These hands are not soft. They are burned. They are scarred. Every callus on these fingers is a receipt. A receipt for the food I put on the table. A receipt for the tuition I paid for my son." I looked at Trey. The smile was slipping from his face. He looked uncomfortable. He looked around the room, realizing that the audience wasn't on his side. They were on mine. "You called this name garbage," I said, my voice rising. "You said you were ashamed to be my son. You stood in a room just like this one and you laughed while you threw my legacy in the trash. You thought you were trading up. You thought you were buying a ticket to a better life. But you forgot one thing, Trey. You forgot that diamonds are found in the dirt. You forgot that steel is forged in the fire. And you forgot that the name you spit on is the only reason you are sitting in that chair wearing that suit." Skylar leaned over to him. "Stop him," she hissed. "Get the money and let's go. This is embarrassing." I ignored her. I turned to Arthur Banks. "Mr. Banks," I said, "please read the terms of the Jefferson Family Trust." Banks stepped up to the podium. He adjusted his glasses. He opened the leather folder. The sound of the paper turning was crisp and loud in the silent room. "The Jefferson Family Trust is established with a principal amount of $15 million, Banks read. His voice was dry and clinical. "The purpose of the trust is to provide generational wealth and security for the direct descendants of Wallace Jefferson." Trey sat up straighter. He heard the number, 15 million. He squeezed Skylar's hand. This was it. Article 4 Banks continued. "Beneficiaries. The trust shall provide a monthly stipend of $50,000 to all eligible beneficiaries, ensuring their financial stability for life. Additionally, the trust will cover all educational and medical expenses in perpetuity, $50,000 a month." I saw Skylar's eyes widen. She was doing the math. That was $600,000 a year just for breathing, plus the baby's expenses. She looked like she was having a religious experience. "However," Banks said, raising his finger, "there is a condition, a mandatory clause that determines eligibility." Trey leaned forward. He looked nervous again. "Read the clause, Arthur," I said. "Read it clearly." Banks looked down at the document. He took a breath. The Jefferson Clause, he read. "To be eligible as a beneficiary of this trust, a descendant must legally and publicly bear the surname Jefferson. This trust is founded on the principle of honoring the family lineage. Therefore, the name Jefferson must appear on the beneficiary's birth certificate and current government-issued identification." Trey froze. He looked at me. Confusion clouded his eyes. He started to stand up. "Dad," he said, his voice shaky. "Dad, what is this?" "I can change it back. I told you I would change it back." "Sit down," I ordered. Banks wasn't finished. Furthermore, Banks read, his voice getting louder. Subsection B, the exclusionary rule. Any direct descendant who has voluntarily and legally petitioned to renounce the surname Jefferson after the age of 18 shall be permanently excluded from the trust. This exclusion is absolute and irreversible. It treats the renouncing individual as predeceased. Predeceased, that means dead. In the eyes of the money, Trey was dead. Trey sank back into his chair. His face went gray. It was the color of old ash. "But Dad," he stammered, "I didn't mean it. It was just paperwork. I haven't even changed my driver's license yet. I can undo it. We can tear up the papers." I looked at him with pity. Deep, profound pity. "You can't tear up the truth, Trey," I said. Banks pulled a piece of paper from the back of the folder. He held it up. "The trust has already performed its due diligence," Banks said. "We have here a certified copy of a petition for name change filed with the Cook County Clerk's office on Thursday morning. It is signed by Wallace Trey Jefferson III, requesting to become Trey Miller. It includes a sworn affidavit stating that the petitioner wishes to sever all association with his former name." Skylar let out a sound that was half gasp, half scream. She grabbed the tablecloth. "You filed it," she shrieked at Trey. "You told me you filed it, you idiot." I stood there watching them turn on each other. "You wanted to be a Miller," I said to Trey. "You told me Miller was a name that opened doors. You told me Jefferson was a name that kept you locked out. Well, congratulations, son. You got your wish. You are a Miller. And as a Miller, you are entitled to exactly nothing from the Jefferson estate." The room erupted. It wasn't applause this time. It was a collective gasp of shock followed by the low rumble of whispers. "My friends, the deacon, Mrs. Higgins." They looked at Trey with sorrow. They understood the justice of it, but they also felt the tragedy. Trey stood up again. He was shaking violently. "Dad, please," he begged. He was crying now. Ugly, desperate tears. "You can't do this. This is $15 million. You can't leave me with nothing. I am your son. I am your only son. I am not leaving you with nothing." I said, my voice soft but carrying to every corner of the room. I gave you an education. I gave you a car. I gave you a down payment on a house. I gave you love. I gave you everything a father could give. And you threw it back in my face because it wasn't enough. You wanted the world, but you didn't want the name that paid for it. But the baby, Skylar yelled, standing up. She pointed at her stomach. What about your grandson? You said this was for the family. You said you wouldn't let him suffer. You are punishing an unborn child because of your ego. I looked at her. I walked around the podium and stood at the edge of the stage looking down at them. I am not punishing him, I said. I am saving him. Banks read the final clause, subsection C. Banks read, in the event that a direct descendant is disqualified due to the exclusionary rule, their offspring shall still be eligible for the trust provided that they legally bear the surname Jefferson at birth and are placed under the trusteeship of the grantor or a guardian appointed by the grantor until the age of 21. I looked at Skylar. The money is there, I said, for him, for my grandson, if he is born a Jefferson, and if his financial future is managed by me. Not you, not Trey. Me. You mean we can't touch it? Skylar asked, her voice trembling with rage. Not a penny, I said. You don't get an allowance. You don't get a mansion. The trust pays for the child's school, the child's doctor, the child's clothes. The bills go directly to Mr. Banks. You will never see a dime of cash. Skylar looked at Trey. Then she looked at me. Then she looked at the exit. I saw the calculation happening in her eyes. She realized the game was over. She realized she was married to a broke man with a mountain of debt and a criminal record, and the only way to access the millions was to hand over control of her child to the man she despised. This is insane, she screamed. You are a monster. You are trying to buy my baby. I am trying to ensure he doesn't end up like his father, I said calmly. Trey looked up at me. His eyes were hollow. He finally understood. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the betrayal. He had signed that paper on Thursday thinking he was tricking a senile old man. He had signed his own financial death warrant. Dad, Trey whispered, please, I will change my name back. I will do anything. I am drowning, Dad. They are going to put me in jail. I looked at him. My heart broke a little. But I remembered the look on his face when he handed me the pen in my living room. I remembered the way he let the doctor call me crazy. Then you better start swimming, Mr. Miller, I said. Because the Jefferson boat has sailed. I turned my back on them. I walked back to the podium. Mr. Banks, I said, close the folder. The business is concluded. I signaled to the band in the corner. Play something lively, I said. We have a lot to celebrate. We still have the name. And that is all that matters. Music filled the room. But down at the front table there was no celebration. Trey Miller slumped into his chair, putting his head in his hands. He was weeping for a fortune lost. Skylar was already typing furiously on her phone, probably calling a divorce lawyer. They were alone in a room full of people. And for the first time in his life, Trey understood the true weight of a name. He had traded gold for lead, and now he had to carry it. The music died as quickly as it had started. The band leader saw the look on my face and lowered his baton, and the room fell into a silence so deep you could hear the air conditioning humming in the vents. It was the sound of a verdict being read. Trey stood at the bottom of the stairs for a moment, his face pale and slick with sweat. He looked at Skylar, who was staring at him with a mixture of horror and calculation. He looked at the guests who were watching him with pity, and then he looked at me. For the first time in his life, he didn't see a bank account or a burden. He saw the only man who could save him from the hell he had created. He scrambled up the stairs. He didn't walk with the swagger of the successful architect anymore. He crawled, almost tripping over his expensive shoes. He rushed to the podium and threw himself at my feet. He grabbed my hand, the same hand he had refused to hold in public for years. Dad, he cried out. His voice broke into a high-pitched sob that echoed off the high ceilings. Dad, please, you cannot do this. I am your son. I am your flesh and blood. It was a mistake. A stupid mistake. I was stressed. I was confused. I didn't mean to throw away the name. I love the name. I love you. I looked down at him. I remembered the little boy who used to scrape his knees and come running to me for a bandage. I remembered the teenager who was too cool to be seen with me. And I saw the man who had sold me out for a country club membership. It is just paper, Dad, Trey pleaded, pulling at my jacket. I can fix it. I will go to the courthouse on Monday morning. I will change it back. I will be Trey Jefferson again. I will be the best Jefferson you ever saw. Just give me a chance. Don't cut me off, please, Dad. I didn't move. I didn't pull my hand away, but I didn't squeeze his back either. I stood like a statue carved from the granite of my ancestors. I looked at Arthur Banks. I nodded once. Arthur stepped forward. He adjusted his glasses and looked down at Trey with the cold, clinical detachment of the law. Mr. Miller. Arthur said, his voice cutting through Trey's, sobbing like a scalpel. I am afraid it is not that simple. The trust document is very specific regarding eligibility. Trey looked up at the lawyer, his eyes wild with panic. I will change my name, he shouted. I will do it tomorrow. It does not matter, Arthur said calmly. He opened the folder again and pointed to a paragraph in fine print. According to Clause 7, Section D, there is a continuity requirement. To be an eligible beneficiary, one must have held the surname Jefferson continuously for a minimum of 30 days prior to the execution of the trust. By filing your petition on Thursday, you broke that continuity. You legally declared your intent to abandon the name. That act alone disqualified you. But I haven't changed my license yet, Trey stammered. The intent is what matters, Arthur said, closing the folder with a final heavy thud. The trust has a morality clause, Mr. Miller. It protects the estate from those who would treat the family name as a convenience rather than a birthright. You made your choice on Thursday. The waiting period to reapply for eligibility is 5 years. And even then, reinstatement is at the sole discretion of the grantor. 5 years, Trey whispered. He looked at me. Dad, 5 years. I don't have 5 years. I don't have 5 days. They are going to arrest me. They are going to take everything. I looked into his eyes. I saw the terror there. But I also saw the truth. He wasn't sorry for hurting me. He was sorry he got caught. He was sorry the gamble didn't pay off. You should have thought about that. I said, my voice soft but unyielding. You should have thought about that when you stood in this very room 6 days ago and laughed while you erased me. You wanted a clean slate, Trey. You wanted to be free of the Jefferson history. Well, you are free. You are completely free. Trey slumped back on his heels. He looked like a puppet whose strings had been cut. He turned his head slowly to look at Skylar. He was looking for his partner. He was looking for the woman who had plotted this with him. He was looking for his wife to come up there and fight for him. But Skylar wasn't coming to fight. She was coming to finish him. She walked up the stairs. The click of her heels on the wood was slow and deliberate. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at the lawyer. She looked only at Trey. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. She stopped in front of him. Trey reached out a hand towards her. Skylar, he whimpered, we can figure this out. The sound of the slap was louder than the microphone feedback. It was a sharp crack that made the entire room flinch. Skylar hit him with every ounce of frustration she had. She hit him for the lost mansion. She hit him for the lost millions. She hit him for her own failure. You useless, pathetic fool, she screamed. Her voice was raw. I told you to wait. I told you to check the details. But you were so arrogant. You just had to rush it. You just had to be a Miller right now. Skylar, please, Trey begged, holding his stinging cheek. Don't speak to me, she hissed. Do not ever speak to me again. You are nothing. You are a broke criminal with a mountain of debt. Did you think I married you for your personality? Did you think I stuck around for your charm? I stuck around because you promised me a future, and now look at you. You are on your knees begging for scraps. She reached down and grabbed his hand. She didn't pull him up. She ripped the wedding ring off his finger. She threw it on the floor. It bounced and rolled away, disappearing under the podium. I am done, she said. I am filing for divorce on Monday, and I am taking full custody of the baby. My son will not be raised by a failure. But the trust, Trey cried. The baby can still get the money. Not if I have anything to do with it, Skylar spat. I would rather starve than let you or your father control my child. I will find a real man, a man with money, a man who knows how to close a deal. She turned to me, earned. She looked me up and down with eyes full of hate. You think you won, old man, she said. You think you taught us a lesson. You are just a sad, lonely, spiteful dinosaur. Enjoy your money. It is the only thing that will ever hold your hand when you die. I smiled at her. It was a cold smile. At least it is my money, Skylar, I said. And at least the name on the check is mine. She let out a scream of frustration and spun around. She marched down the stairs, pushing past the deacon, pushing past Mrs. Higgins. She stormed out of the ballroom, the double doors swinging shut behind her. She took the silence with her, leaving only the echo of her greed. Trey was left alone on the stage. He was kneeling in the center of the spotlight. He looked around the room. He saw the faces of the community he had rejected. He saw the disappointment in their eyes. He saw the pity. It was the exact same scene as the wedding, but the roles were reversed. He was the one in the corner. He was the one who didn't belong. He was the invisible man. He looked up at me one last time. His eyes were dead. "Dad," he whispered. "What do I do?" I stepped back from the podium. I adjusted my cuffs. "You grow up, Trey," I said. "You go out there and you face the consequences. You take the punishment. You serve the time. And maybe in 5 years when you get out, you will understand what it means to build something real." I signaled to the security guards I had hired. They stepped out from the shadows. They were big men, professional men. "Escort Mr. Miller out," I said. "This is a private party for the Jefferson family, and he is not on the list." 2 guards walked up the stairs. They lifted Trey to his feet. He didn't fight. He was too broken to fight. He let them walk him down the stairs. He let them lead him through the crowd. He kept his head down, unable to meet the gaze of the people he had insulted. He walked out the same doors his wife had just exited. He walked out into a world where he had no car, no job, no wife, and no name. I watched him go. A part of me died with him. The part of me that was a father who wanted to protect his child from the world. But another part of me was born. The patriarch who protected the honor of his bloodline. I turned back to the crowd. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. They were waiting to see what I would do. They were waiting to see if I would crumble. I didn't crumble. I picked up the microphone one last time. "I am sorry for the interruption," I said. My voice was calm. "Sometimes you have to clean the house before you can invite guests in." I looked towards the back of the room where a group of young people were standing. They were the scholarship students from the local college. Bright kids, hardworking kids, kids who knew the value of $1 because they had never had enough of them. I beckoned them forward. "Come here," I said. "Come up to the stage." They walked up tentatively. There were 10 of them. Their faces were open and honest. They looked at me with awe. I looked at Arthur Banks. "Open the second folder," I said. Banks smiled. He opened a blue folder. "Today the Jefferson name has lost a son," I told the crowd, "but it is not going to die. A name lives on through the people who honor it, through the people who carry its values." I turned to the students. "You are the future," I said. "You are the ones who will build this city. You are the ones who will heal the sick and teach the children, and I want to help you do it." I announced the formation of the Wallace Jefferson Scholarship Fund. I announced that the $15 million would not be hoarded. It would be planted. It would pay for tuition. It would pay for books. It would pay for dreams. The room exploded. This time it was real applause. It was thunderous. People were crying. Mrs. Higgins was waving her handkerchief. The deacon was shouting, "Amen." The students on stage were hugging each other, tears streaming down their faces. One young girl grabbed my hand and kissed it. "Thank you, Mr. Jefferson," she sobbed. "Thank you." I looked at her. I looked at the joy in the room. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The heavy, suffocating weight of my son's betrayal was gone. In its place was something lighter, something brighter. I walked down the stairs. I didn't look back at the empty spot where Trey had knelt. I didn't look back at the doors where Skylar had fled. I walked into the crowd. I shook hands. I hugged my neighbors. I drank the cheap punch. I walked over to the window and looked out at the street. I saw a solitary figure walking towards the bus stop. It was Trey. He was walking with his shoulders slumped, his expensive suit looking out of place on the dirty sidewalk. He looked lonely. He looked small. I watched him until he turned the corner and vanished. I turned back to the party. The music had started again. A jazz band was playing a song from my youth. It was a song about survival, a song about rising up. I took a deep breath. The air smelled of perfume and sweat and joy. It smelled of life. I was 71 years old. I was alone in my house, but I wasn't alone in the world. I had my name, I had my dignity, and I had the truth. I smiled. It was the first real smile I had felt in a long time. It started in my chest and warmed me all the way to my toes. I adjusted my tie. I smoothed my jacket. I am Wallace Jefferson, I whispered to myself. And I am just getting started. I learned that a legacy is not built on the zeros in a bank account, but on the integrity of the name you carry. My son thought he could buy a brighter future by selling his past, but he ended up bankrupt in both money and character. True wealth is not about the mansion you live in. It is about the respect you command when you walk into a room and the peace you feel when you look in the mirror. You cannot build a castle on a foundation of shame. Be proud of who you are and where you come from, because the moment you try to be someone else, you lose the only thing that truly matters, which is your soul. If you believe that family honor is worth more than any paycheck, hit that like button and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And tell me in the comments below, would you ever change your last name for money, or is your history not for sale? I will be reading your answers. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of justice served cold. See you in the next one.